The Burned Land. A widow with 4 starving children. A stranger who lost everything once before. And a summer sun hot enough to finish what the fire started. Lena Ward knelt in the ashes of her burned homestead, her children's lips cracked and bleeding, when a shadow fell across the rubble. The lone rider didn't ask questions. He simply extended a canteen with hands scarred by flame. In that moment, beneath the merciless Wyoming sky, 2 people carrying unbearable weight found something neither expected, a reason to stop running from the past. If you want to see where this story of second chances and survival leads, stay with me until the end. And please, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this journey reaches. The high plains stretched endlessly beneath a sun that seemed to have forgotten mercy. Heat rose in visible waves from the parched earth, distorting the horizon until sky and land became one shimmering blur. Ethan Cole rode with his hat pulled low, squinting against the glare that turned everything the color of old bone. His horse moved with the tired patience of an animal that knew better than to waste energy in weather like this. 3 weeks he'd been crossing this emptiness, heading nowhere in particular. Just away. Always away. The smell hit him first, smoke, but not fresh. The stale, settled stink of a fire days old, where wood had burned to nothing and only ash remained. He straightened in the saddle, scanning the wavering distance until he spotted it. The skeleton of a homestead, walls collapsed inward, timbers jutting like broken ribs against the pale sky. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough burned-out dreams scattered across the frontier to know what they meant. Drought, desperation, accidents with cook stoves or lamps, sometimes raids, mostly just bad luck meeting worse timing. He should have ridden past, should have kept the ruins at his back and whatever ghosts they held buried in their own ashes. But something made him turn his horse toward the wreckage, some instinct he'd learned to trust, even when it led him places he didn't want to go. The homestead had been modest, maybe 3 rooms, a small barn that was now just charred posts. A wagon sat untouched 50 yards away, its contents scattered like someone had searched through them in a hurry. Clothes, a broken chair, a child's doll with its face scorched black. Ethan dismounted slowly, every muscle remembering the last time he'd walked through ruins like these. His boots crunched on debris as he moved closer to what had been the main structure. The heat was still trapped in the ashes, radiating up through the soles of his boots. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the wind's constant whisper through the burned timbers. A whimper. Small, animal-like, but human enough to freeze him in place. "Hello?" His voice came out rough, unused. "Anyone here?" Silence. Then again, that soft, desperate sound. Ethan moved faster now, circling the collapsed walls until he found what remained of a stone hearth, still standing despite the devastation around it. Behind it, pressed into the small pocket of shade it offered, was a woman. She looked up at him with eyes that had gone beyond fear into something harder. Her dress was torn and filthy, her face streaked with soot and dried sweat, and around her, like chicks sheltered beneath a hen, were 4 children. The oldest couldn't have been more than 8, a girl with tangled dark hair and her mother's steady gaze. 2 boys, maybe 5 and 6, clung to each other with the blank expression of children who'd stopped crying because tears were a luxury they couldn't afford. And an infant, barely moving in the woman's arms, its face alarmingly red despite the shade. "Water." The woman's voice was a rasp, barely audible. Not a question. A statement of what was needed, or they'd die. Ethan was already moving, unhitching his canteen from his saddle with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. He'd learned a long time ago that panic killed faster than thirst. He knelt in front of the woman, uncapping the canteen and holding it steady as she drank. Not too much, not too fast, though he could see the discipline it took for her to pull away. "The children first," she said, and there was steel beneath the exhaustion. He helped her give water to each child, watching how carefully she rationed it, how she made the baby take it slow despite its desperate sucking at the wet cloth she pressed to its mouth. The 2 middle boys reached for the canteen with shaking hands, and the older girl waited her turn without complaint. "When did you last eat?" Ethan asked. The woman's laugh was bitter as alkali dust. 2 days, maybe 3. Lost count." "The fire?" 5 days ago, maybe 6. She looked at him with those hard, measuring eyes. We've been waiting. For what? Someone. Anyone. She shifted the baby in her arms. Or for it to be over. The words were matter of fact, spoken without self-pity, and somehow that made them worse. Ethan looked at the 4 children, sunburned, hollow-cheeked, their lips cracked and bleeding. The baby's breathing was too shallow, too quick. He'd walked away from responsibility 3 years ago, ridden away from the ashes of his own life, and sworn never to carry that weight again. But looking at this woman who refused to cry, even as she sheltered her dying children, he felt something shift in the careful numbness he'd built around himself. I have a cabin, he said. Half a day's ride north. There's food, a well with good water, shelter. Why? Direct as a bullet. Because if you stay here, you'll die. Probably by tomorrow. She studied his face for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable sense of being measured against some internal standard he couldn't see. Finally, she nodded. I'm Lena Ward. This is Sarah, Thomas, James, and... She looked down at the infant. This is Grace. Ethan Cole. He stood, already calculating what needed to happen next. Can you walk? If I have to. The wagon over there, it yours? Was. Husband bought it in Denver before... She stopped, jaw tight. Horse? Dead, 3 days ago. Ethan looked at his own horse, a sturdy roan that had carried him across half of Wyoming without complaint. The animal was tired, but not done. We'll load the children in the wagon. I'll hitch my horse to it. You ride with them. What about you? I'll walk. Lena's eyes narrowed. That's half a day, you said, in this heat. I've done worse. She looked like she wanted to argue, but the baby made a thin mewling sound that ended the discussion. All right. Getting them to this wagon took longer than it should have. Lena could barely stand, and the 2 middle boys had to be carried. Sarah, the oldest, walked beside her mother with grim determination, holding Thomas's hand when he stumbled. Ethan worked quickly, hitching his horse to the wagon, checking the wheels and axles. Everything held. He found a torn piece of canvas in the scattered belongings and rigged it over the wagon bed to provide shade. Then he lifted each child up, settling them as comfortably as he could on the rough boards. There's jerky in my saddlebag, he told Lena as he helped her climb up. Small pieces. Make them chew it slow. She nodded, already reaching for the food with hands that shook from more than hunger. Ethan took the horse's lead and started walking north. The sun beat down on his shoulders like a physical weight, and the earth seemed to shimmer with trapped heat. Behind him, he heard the wagon creak and settle as Lena distributed the jerky, heard her low voice telling the children to sip, not gulp, the remaining water. He'd left Jackson Hole 3 weeks ago with no destination in mind, just the need to keep moving. The cabin he was taking them to had been a line shack once, abandoned when the big ranches consolidated. He'd claimed it by the simple act of staying, fixing the roof, clearing the well. It wasn't much. 1 room with a sleeping loft, a small barn that leaned but still stood, a corral that needed mending. But it was shelter. It was water. It was enough to keep 5 people alive until they figured out what came next, if they made it that far. Ethan glanced back at the wagon. Lena sat with her back straight despite obvious exhaustion, the baby cradled against her chest, her other arm around Sarah. The 2 boys had already fallen asleep in the shade, their small bodies finally able to surrender to rest. She caught him looking and lifted her chin slightly, a gesture that somehow conveyed both gratitude and warning. Don't expect me to be helpless. Don't expect me to break. He turned back to the trail, something uncomfortably close to respect settling in his chest. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky white with heat. Ethan's shirt stuck to his back, sweat running down his spine and into his belt. His throat grew dry, but he didn't touch the half canteen of water he'd kept. That was for the children if they needed it before they reached the cabin. They passed through a stretch of land so barren it might never have known water, just cracked earth and the bleached bones of something that had died seasons ago. Ethan kept his pace steady, mechanically placing 1 foot in front of the other. This was familiar territory, endurance, pushing through discomfort, the simple mathematics of survival. Around mid-afternoon, he heard movement in the wagon and turned to see Lena trying to stand. Sit down, he called back. You'll fall and break something. The baby needs... Her voice cracked. She's too hot. She's not... Ethan stopped the horse and walked back to the wagon. Grace lay limp in Lena's arms, her tiny chest rising and falling too fast, her skin flushed and dry. No sweat. That was bad. Bodies that stopped sweating in heat like this were bodies starting to shut down. "Give me your shawl," he said. Lena hesitated, then unwrapped the thin fabric from her shoulders. Ethan poured the last of his water over it, wringing out the excess before draping it over the baby's head and torso. The cloth steamed slightly in the heat, but it would help. For a little while. "How much further?" Lena asked. Ethan scanned the horizon, finding the landmarks he'd been tracking. 2 hours, maybe 3. She doesn't have 3 hours. He looked at the baby's gray-tinged lips, the way her small fists had uncurled. "I know." "Then what?" "There's a creek bed about a mile ahead. Dry this time of year, but there's rock overhang, shade. We'll stop there, rest through the worst heat, move again when the sun's lower." "Will that be enough?" Ethan met her eyes, saw the fear she was trying to wall off behind that fierce composure. "I don't know, but it's better than pushing through and having her die in the back of a moving wagon." Lena flinched, but nodded. "All right." The miles stretched longer than distance had any right to. Ethan found himself counting steps, anything to mark progress against the unchanging landscape. When he finally spotted the dark line of the creek bed cutting across the plain, relief loosened something in his chest. The overhang was where he remembered. A shelf of sandstone that created a shallow cave, barely 8 feet deep but blessedly cool compared to the inferno outside. Ethan helped Lena down, then carried each sleeping child to the shade. Sarah woke during the transfer and immediately moved to help with her brothers, her small face serious. "There might be water if we dig," Ethan said, studying the creek bed. "Sand's damp here." He used his hands and a flat rock to excavate a shallow hole in the deepest part of the channel. 6 inches down, the sand turned dark and wet. A foot down, water began to seep in, muddy and slow, but water nonetheless. "Let it settle," he told Sarah, who'd come to watch with wide eyes. "Half an hour, it'll be clear enough to drink." "Is it safe?" Lena asked from the shade, still holding the baby. "Safe as anything out here. I've drunk from worse." While they waited for the water to clear, Ethan unhitched his horse and led it to a patch of struggling grass near the overhang. The animal dropped its head to graze, too tired to wander. He checked the wagon, redistributing weight, making sure nothing had shifted loose during the journey. When he turned back, he found Lena watching him with that same measuring look. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "Do what?" "Stop. Help. Any of it." She adjusted the damp cloth on the baby's forehead. Most men would have ridden past, or offered water and kept going. Ethan leaned against the wagon, suddenly aware of his own exhaustion. "Maybe. So why didn't you?" He was quiet for a long moment, watching heat waves shimmer across the plains. "Because I know what it's like," he said finally, "to watch everything burn. To be left with nothing but ashes and questions about why you survived when you're not sure you wanted to." Lena's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Your family? Wife? Daughter?" The words still came hard, even after 3 years. "House fire. I was in town buying supplies. By the time I got back..." He stopped, jaw clenched. Nothing left but smoke and silence. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It's done." He pushed off the wagon, needing to move. Water should be settled by now. He brought up handfuls of the muddy liquid in his cupped palms, letting Lena drink first, then the children. It tasted of minerals and earth, but it was cool and wet, and that was enough. Even the baby took some, sucking weakly at the damp cloth. They stayed in the shade as the sun crawled across the sky, brutal and bright. The children slept again, curled together in the coolest part of the overhang. Lena dozed with the baby on her chest, one hand always touching Sarah, the other protective over Grace's small body. Ethan sat at the entrance, watching the plains waver in the heat. 3 years he'd spent running from memory, taking work where he found it, never staying long enough to build anything permanent. He'd convinced himself that solitude was safety, that caring about nothing meant nothing could hurt him again. But looking at these 4 children, at their mother who wouldn't break even when breaking would have been justified, he felt the careful architecture of his isolation start to crack. He didn't want this. Didn't want the responsibility, the vulnerability of having someone depend on him. Every instinct screamed at him to get them to the cabin, make sure they were stable, then ride away before attachment could take root. But there was Sarah's quiet courage, helping without being asked. Thomas and James's trust, falling asleep in a stranger's wagon because their mother said it was safe. Grace's fragile grip on life, fighting with a strength that defied her size. And Lena herself, proud, practical, refusing to be a victim even when circumstances had earned her the right. When the sun finally dropped low enough to paint the sky orange and gold, Ethan stood and stretched muscles that had gone stiff. Time to move. Lena woke immediately, that awareness of a mother who never truly rests. She checked each child, satisfied herself that they were all right, then let Ethan help her back into the wagon. The evening journey was easier. Cooler air brought relief, and the children woke enough to sit up and look around with something approaching curiosity. Ethan walked with renewed energy, recognizing landmarks now. The broken cottonwood, the ridge where eagles nested, the rock formation that marked the final approach to his land. Full dark had fallen by the time they crested the last rise and saw the cabin below, a squat shadow against the star-filled sky. Smoke rose from the chimney. No, not smoke. His eyes adjusted and he realized it was just heat shimmer from the day's warmth escaping the earth. "That's it?" Lena asked, and he couldn't tell if the tone was disappointment or relief. "That's it. Not much, but the roof doesn't leak and the well's good." He led the horse down the slope to the cabin, every step bringing them closer to something he hadn't felt in 3 years, the possibility of home. The cabin was dark inside, but Ethan knew every inch by touch. He lit the lamp hanging by the door, and warm light spilled across a single room with a table, 2 chairs, a cook stove, and a rope bed in one corner. A ladder led to a sleeping loft above. "Children can sleep in the loft," he said, already moving to light the stove. "You take the bed. I'll—" "Where will you sleep?" Lena interrupted. "Barn's fine. Done it before." She looked like she wanted to argue, but the baby made that thin sound again, and her priorities shifted immediately. "Water first, then food. Then we'll worry about sleeping arrangements." Ethan filled a bucket from the well, good cold water that tasted clean after the muddy creek. He watched Lena give each child a full cup, watched them drink with the focused intensity of people who'd forgotten what it felt like to have enough. While Lena tended the baby, Ethan fried salt pork and cornmeal mush, simple food but hot and filling. The children ate slowly at first, then faster as their stomachs remembered how to be hungry instead of just empty. Sarah helped serve her brothers, and Ethan noticed how Lena made sure each child ate before taking anything herself. "You too," he said, pushing a plate toward her. "Can't take care of them if you collapse." She met his eyes, and for the first time he saw the exhaustion beneath the steel. "Thank you for all of this. We would have—" She stopped, looking at her children. "Thank you." Ethan nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude, and busied himself cleaning the pan. After the children had eaten themselves into drowsy fullness, Lena carried them one by one up the ladder to the loft. Ethan heard her arranging blankets, heard her soft voice telling them they were safe now, they could sleep. When she came back down, she swayed slightly, catching herself on the ladder. "When did you last sleep?" Ethan asked. "Really sleep? Before the fire, I think." She lowered herself into one of the chairs. "Been afraid to. Kept thinking if I closed my eyes, I'd wake up and they'd be—" She stopped, jaw tight. "You're safe here. I'll keep watch. You need sleep too." "I'm used to short nights." He gestured to the bed. "Go. I mean it. You're no good to those kids if you keel over." Lena looked at the bed like a woman considering surrender after a long siege. Finally, she nodded. She didn't even remove her boots, just lay down on top of the blanket and was asleep before Ethan had finished banking the stove. He sat in the remaining chair, watching the lamp flame flicker. From the loft came the sound of children's breathing, steady, peaceful, alive. Outside, wind whispered through the grass and an owl called from somewhere in the darkness. For 3 years, Ethan had filled this cabin with silence. He'd chosen it deliberately, built walls of quiet between himself and the world. But tonight, listening to the sounds of other people breathing, he realized how profoundly lonely that silence had been. The baby made a small sound, and he heard Lena stir in her sleep, her mother's instinct working even in unconsciousness. But Grace settled again, and Lena's breathing evened out. Ethan stood and moved to the door, looking out at the star-scattered sky. The same stars that had watched his world burn 3 years ago. The same stars that had seen Lena's life go up in smoke. The same stars that would keep watching, indifferent to human suffering or survival. But he wasn't indifferent. Not anymore. Not standing here in a cabin full of people who'd somehow become his responsibility in the space of a single brutal day. He didn't know what came next. Didn't know if Lena would stay or move on once they'd recovered. Didn't know if he wanted her to stay or if the thought terrified him. What he knew was this. Tomorrow he'd draw more water from the well. He'd cook more food. He'd help 4 children remember how to be children instead of survivors. He'd give a woman who refused to break the space to be strong or fragile or whatever she needed to be. And maybe, in the process of keeping them alive, he'd remember what it felt like to live, instead of just endure. Ethan closed the door and turned back to the lamplit cabin. In the bed, Lena slept with one hand stretched toward the loft, toward her children, even in dreams unable to fully let go. In the loft, 4 children breathed the deep, trusting rhythm of safety. And in the space between them all, something fragile and essential took root. The possibility that ashes didn't have to be an ending. That survival could be the beginning of something more. That sometimes the people you saved ended up saving you right back. The first full day began with light filtering through gaps in the cabin's shutters, turning dust motes into small constellations. Ethan woke in the barn where he'd finally bedded down after watching the cabin until near dawn, his back complaining about hay that wasn't as soft as memory pretended. He stood slowly, working the stiffness from his shoulders, and looked toward the cabin where smoke already rose from the chimney. Lena was awake then. He'd figured she would be. Mothers didn't sleep late even when exhaustion had carved hollows beneath their eyes. He found her at the stove turning cornmeal cakes with practiced efficiency despite working in an unfamiliar kitchen. The baby lay in a nest of blankets on the table, watching her mother with dark, alert eyes that suggested the worst danger had passed. Grace's color had improved overnight, the gray tinge replaced by healthier pink. "You should have slept longer," Ethan said from the doorway. Lena didn't turn. "Old habits. Up before dawn for 16 years, body doesn't know how to do different." She flipped another cake. "There's coffee. Made it strong. Hope that's all right." "Strong's good." He poured himself a cup from the battered pot, the bitter smell cutting through morning fog in his head. "How's the baby?" "Better. Took water twice in the night without fussing. Even nursed a little." Lena's voice carried relief she didn't bother hiding. "I think she'll make it." "And the others?" "Still sleeping. Let them. God knows they've earned rest." She finally glanced at him, and he saw she'd washed her face, attempted to tame her hair. The effort at normalcy in circumstances that were anything but. "I used some of your water. Hope that's... Use what you need. Well's deep and the spring's good. Won't run dry." Lena nodded, turning back to the stove. They fell into silence that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't hostile either. Ethan drank his coffee and watched her work, noticed how she moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime making do with less than enough. No wasted motion, every action purposeful. "Your husband," he said finally, because the question had been building since yesterday. "The fire. Was it an accident?" Her hand stilled on the spatula. "You don't pull punches, do you?" "Out here, dancing around truth just wastes time." She was quiet long enough that he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "I don't know. Maybe. Probably." She set down the spatula, staring at the cook stove like it held answers. "Daniel, my husband, he wasn't a careful man. Drank more than he should. Smoked in bed sometimes when he thought I was asleep. Could have been that. Could have been the lamp he always left burning in the barn." "You have suspicions it was something else?" "Had." She corrected him with emphasis on the past tense. Daniel owed money. Not a lot by some standards, but more than we had. Man he owed came around a week before the fire, making noise about what happens to people who don't pay their debts. She picked up the spatula again, movement sharp now. But the lawman in town said it was accidental, said there was no evidence of anything else, said I should be grateful I had the children out that night visiting my sister. Convenient timing. That's what I thought, but thinking something and proving it are different things. She slid the cornmeal cakes onto a plate. And now Daniel's dead. The debt died with him according to the law, and I've got 4 children and nothing else. So whether it was accident or intention doesn't much matter, does it? Ethan studied her profile, the hard set of her jaw. You went back to the homestead. After. Why? Because everything we owned was there. Our wagon, some clothes, Sarah's doll, Thomas's blanket he's had since he was born. Little things that maybe survived. She laughed, bitter. Stupid, I know. Should have just kept going, but I thought, She stopped, collected herself. I thought maybe I could salvage something, prove we'd existed, that our life there meant something. Instead, you nearly died. Instead, I nearly died. She met his eyes directly. Until you came along. So I guess stupid sometimes gets balanced by lucky. Before Ethan could respond, the sound of small feet on the ladder interrupted them. Sarah climbed down, her hair wild from sleep, and stopped when she saw Ethan, suddenly shy. Morning, he said. She ducked her head. Morning, sir. Just Ethan's fine. Mama says we should show respect to folks helping us. Your mama's right about most things, I'd wager, but I'm just Ethan. He gestured to the table. You hungry? Sarah nodded, and Lena was already fixing her a plate. The girl ate with focus, and Ethan noticed she kept glancing at the baby, making sure Grace was still breathing, still there. She's all right, Lena said gently. You don't have to watch so close. I know, but I like making sure. One by one the boys woke and came down. Thomas rubbing his eyes, James carrying a battered wooden horse Ethan didn't recognize. Must have survived the fire somehow, made the journey in the wagon. Is this your house? Thomas asked around a mouthful of cornmeal cake. Thomas, don't talk with your mouth full, Lena corrected automatically. The boy swallowed. Sorry, but is it? It is, Ethan confirmed. It's smaller than ours was. James's observation held no judgment, just fact. James! Lena's voice sharpened. It's all right. Ethan refilled his coffee. He's not wrong. It's meant for 1 person, maybe 2. Not 6. We won't stay long, Lena said quickly, just until we're strong enough to move on. I don't expect... I'm not complaining, just stating fact, same as the boy. He looked at the 4 children crowded around his small table, at Lena holding the baby while trying to eat her own breakfast. But we'll need to figure some things out if you're staying more than a day or 2. Like what? Sarah asked, her quiet voice cutting through. Like where everyone sleeps proper, like getting more food, like making sure you all have clothes that fit and aren't falling apart. He counted off on his fingers, like finding out what you need and don't have. We don't have much of anything, Thomas said matter-of-factly. The fire took it. Then we start from there. Ethan stood, the scrape of his chair loud in the small space. After breakfast, we take inventory, see what we've got, what we need. Make a plan. Lena watched him with that measuring look again. You keep saying we. You got a problem with that? I got a problem with charity I can't repay. Who said anything about charity? Ethan crossed his arms. You can work, can't you? I've got land here, more than I can manage alone. Garden's half wild, barn needs mending, fence is falling down in 3 places. You want to earn your keep? There's plenty of earning to do. Something shifted in Lena's expression. Relief, maybe, or pride being salvaged. I can work. Work hard. Never doubted it. He looked at Sarah. You old enough to help mind your brothers? She straightened. Yes, sir. Yes, Ethan. Good. Your mama and I are going to figure out what needs doing. You keep an eye on things here. I can do that. After breakfast, Ethan led Lena outside while Sarah watched the younger children. The morning sun was already building heat, but the air still held a hint of the night's coolness. He showed her the well first, deep and stone-lined, water clear and cold when he drew up a bucket. "This is good water," Lena said, cupping a handful to drink. "Better than what we had." "Spring-fed. Doesn't matter how dry it gets, this well keeps giving." He pointed to a rectangular patch of ground surrounded by sagging fence. "That was supposed to be a garden. Got some things growing still. Potatoes gone wild, some beans, couple of squash plants. Mostly it's weeds now." Lena walked to the garden, crouching to examine the plants that had survived neglect. "This could produce," she said. "If we clear the weeds, water regular, maybe stake the beans proper." She looked up at him. "You plant this?" "First summer I was here. Had good intentions about keeping it up. Then," he shrugged, "got busy with other things. Let it go." "Shame to waste it." She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "I'm good with gardens. Kept ours producing even in bad years." They moved on to the barn, a leaning structure that groaned in strong winds but still kept the weather out. His horse stood in one of two stalls, the other empty except for old straw. "Roof's solid," Ethan said, "but the walls need bracing before winter, and the whole thing could use re-chinkling." "You planning to winter here?" Lena asked carefully. "Was. Unless you've got other plans that need this cabin." She was quiet, running her hand along a stall door that hung crooked. "I don't have plans. Don't have anything to make plans with." "Then we've got time to figure it out." They walked the property line, such as it was, marked more by natural boundaries than any official claim. Creek bed to the east, dry now, but Ethan said it ran good in spring. Ridge to the north with rocky soil that wouldn't grow much. Rolling grassland south and west. Open range that nobody owned and everybody used. "How much land you figure you've got?" Lena asked. "Never measured exact. Maybe 100 acres I could reasonably claim if I wanted to file proper. Most of it's grazing land, but there's good soil near the cabin, enough to expand that garden significant. Maybe run some chickens, a milk cow if we wanted." There was that word again, and Lena stopped walking. "Ethan, I need to understand what you're offering here. Is this temporary shelter, or are you talking about something more?" He met her eyes, saw the directness there, the refusal to dance around difficult things. "Honest answer? I don't know yet. I'm not a man who plans much beyond next week." He looked back at the cabin where smoke still rose from the chimney. "But I know you need a place and I've got one. I know I could use help and you need work. Beyond that," he shrugged. "We'll see what develops." "Fair enough." Lena started walking again. "Long as we're clear, I'm not looking for rescue. I'm looking for a chance to stand on my own feet again." "Never thought different." They spent the rest of the morning working through what needed doing. The list grew long, mending fence, shoring up the barn, expanding the garden, making the cabin more livable for 6 people instead of 1. Ethan had tools, but not enough. Had food, but not the kind that stretched to feed children. Had one set of everything when they needed multiples. "Town's 2 days' ride," he said as they sat in the cabin's shade, Lena nursing the baby while the other children explored the immediate area under Sarah's watchful eye. "Need to make a supply run. Get proper food, some cloth for clothes, maybe some lumber if the price isn't robbery." "That'll cost money." "Got some saved. Not a fortune, but enough." Lena shifted Grace to her other side. "I can't let you spend your savings on us." "You can't stop me either." He stood before she could argue further. "I'm going tomorrow. Be gone 2, maybe 3 days. You'll be all right here?" "We've survived worse than being alone in a cabin with food and water." "There's a rifle over the door. You know how to shoot?" "Daniel taught me. I'm not expert, but I can hit what I aim at if it's close enough." "Good. Probably won't need it, but better to have it." Ethan looked at the children playing near the well, Thomas and James taking turns cranking the bucket up and down while Sarah supervised. "Keep them close to the cabin. There's cats in the rocks sometimes, and I saw a coyote sign last week. We'll be careful." That afternoon, Ethan prepared for the journey while Lena started work on the garden. He watched her from the barn, seeing how she moved through the weeds with systematic precision, creating order from chaos. Sarah worked beside her, pulling smaller weeds while her mother tackled the bigger growth. The boys played with surprising energy for children who'd been half dead 2 days ago, resilience of youth bouncing back faster than adults. They'd found the wooden horse and were taking turns riding an imaginary racecourse that circled the well. It looked almost normal, almost like a family going about ordinary business on an ordinary day. Except Lena's dress was still torn and smoke-stained. Except the children had no clothes besides what they wore. Except everything about this arrangement was temporary, improvised, held together by necessity and nothing else. Ethan saddled his horse and checked the packs, making mental lists of what to buy in town. Flour, cornmeal, salt, sugar, coffee, beans, dried beef, lard, cloth for dresses and shirts, thread, needles, maybe some candy for the children if there was money left over, lumber if possible, nails, extra rope. The list felt domestic in a way that made him uncomfortable. For 3 years he'd bought for one, thought for one, planned for one. Now he was calculating how much 4 children could eat, whether Lena would prefer blue cloth or brown if babies needed something special he didn't know about. "You're frowning." Lena's voice startled him. She'd come up quiet, the baby drowsing against her shoulder. "Just thinking. About how much my life's changed in 2 days." She studied his face. "Having regrets?" "No, just adjusting." He tied off the last pack strap. "You sure you'll be all right while I'm gone?" "Ethan, I managed a homestead and 4 children while Daniel was off drinking or gambling or whatever else took him from work. I think I can handle 3 days in a cabin with a well and a garden and no disasters requiring immediate attention. Point taken." He swung into the saddle. "If anyone comes around, I'll be polite but careful. Won't tell them our business. Won't let anyone in I don't trust." She smiled slightly. "I'm not helpless, despite recent evidence to the contrary." "Never thought you were." He rode out as the sun started its downward slide, looking back once to see Lena standing by the cabin with Grace in her arms. Sarah and the boys clustered around her skirts. They looked small against the vast openness of the plains, vulnerable in a way that made his chest tight. But Lena raised one hand in farewell, her posture straight and sure, and he knew she'd be fine. She was tougher than Rawhide and twice as stubborn. It was one of the things he was starting to respect about her. The ride to town gave him time to think, maybe too much time. He'd been alone with his thoughts for 3 years, and they'd become familiar companions, regret, grief, the endless loop of what if that played whenever he let his guard down. But now there were new thoughts intruding, practical concerns about feeding children and mending clothes. Larger questions about what he was doing, why he was doing it, what happened when temporary turned permanent, if it turned permanent. Ethan made camp that night in a grove of cottonwoods, hobbled his horse, and built a small fire. He ate cold jerky and thought about Lena's question, was he having regrets? Honest answer was complicated. He didn't regret helping. Leaving them would have been murder by inaction, and he wasn't that man no matter how much he'd tried to hollow himself out. But helping and taking on responsibility were different things. One was a moment's choice. The other was a commitment that could stretch into months, years, a lifetime. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks into darkness that swallowed them immediately. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and another answered. Night sounds of the plains, familiar as breathing. Except now he found himself wondering if the children were scared of those sounds. If Sarah was keeping watch from the loft window like she seemed the type to do. If Lena was getting any rest or lying awake, alert to every noise, unable to trust even temporary safety. He was in deeper than he'd intended. That much was clear. The question was whether he was willing to go deeper still, or if he'd pull back once Lena and the children were stable, set them up somewhere, make sure they had what they needed, then return to the careful isolation he'd built. The fire burned down to coals, and Ethan still didn't have an answer. Town was called Sweetwater, though the creek it was named for ran bitter with alkali 3 months out of the year. 2 streets of weathered buildings, a hotel that served meals, a general store, a saloon, a church that optimistically rang its bell every Sunday whether anyone came or not. Ethan tied his horse outside the general store and went in, the bell over the door announcing his arrival. Horace Kimball looked up from his ledger, recognition flickering across his weathered face. "Ethan Cole. Been a while. 2 months, maybe? 2.5. I keep track." Horace set down his pencil. "What brings you in? Usual supplies?" "More than usual." Ethan pulled out the list he'd scratched on paper the night before. Got some people staying with me. Need to stock up proper. Horace's eyebrows rose, but he was smart enough not to ask directly. People. How many we talking? Woman and 4 children. Now both eyebrows disappeared into Horace's thinning hairline. Family? No. Found them after their place burned. Needed shelter. Charitable of you. Horace's tone suggested he was recalculating everything he thought he knew about Ethan Cole. Let's see that list. They went through items one by one, Horace pulling goods from shelves and bins, commenting on prices that had gone up or quality that had gone down. Flour, cornmeal, sugar, salt, coffee, beans, rice, dried apples, lard, bacon, more. Bolts of cloth, sturdy brown cotton for work clothes, softer blue for dresses. Thread in multiple colors, needles, scissors, buttons. This is considerable expense, Horace said carefully. You want to run a tab, I can... Cash. Ethan counted out bills, watching his savings diminish. Need it today. Some of this I'll have to order. The cloth, for instance. I've got some, but not enough for what you're wanting. Can have it next week if you want to come back. I'll come back. Horace packed what he had, boxes and parcels that filled Ethan's saddlebags and required a second pack horse he rented from the livery. As Ethan loaded everything, Horace hovered, clearly wanting to ask questions, but uncertain how they'd be received. Finally, he just said, "This woman. She all right? The children?" "They will be." "Good, that's good." Horace hesitated. "If they need anything else, clothes for the little ones, shoes maybe, I sometimes get donations from families whose kids outgrow things. Happy to pass them along." Ethan looked at the store owner, saw genuine concern beneath the nosiness. "I'll let her know. Appreciate it." He was leading the pack horse down the street when he heard his name called. Turning, he saw Rachel Morrison coming from the hotel, her face lighting up with pleased surprise. "Ethan Cole, as I live and breathe, thought you'd disappeared into the wilderness permanently. Just staying out of the way." Rachel was somewhere past 40, a widow who ran the hotel and kept her nose in everyone's business out of what she claimed was community concern. She had a good heart beneath the interference, and Ethan had always found her more tolerable than annoying. "Horace says you've got people staying with you." She looked at the loaded pack horse. "That's a lot of supplies for one man. Word travels fast. It's Sweetwater. Word travels before you finish having it." She smiled. "Woman and 4 children," Horace said. "They in trouble?" "Were. Getting better." Rachel's expression sobered. "She running from something? Husband trouble?" "Husband's dead. House burned. They got nothing and nowhere." "Lord have mercy." Rachel pressed a hand to her chest. "Those poor babies. How old?" 8 down to infant. And you're helping them. That's kind, Ethan. Real kind." She studied him. "They staying long?" "Don't know yet." "Well, when you know, you let me know. Church ladies always got clothes and such we can spare. And if the woman needs work eventually, hotel can always use help." "I'll tell her." Rachel touched his arm, her voice dropping. "I'm glad you're doing this. You've been alone too long carrying grief that way. Maybe helping someone else helps you too." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and led the horses away. The ride back took 2 days, and he spent them thinking about Rachel's words. Maybe helping someone else helps you too. He wasn't sure he believed that. Wasn't sure he wanted to examine too closely what helping Lena and the children might do to the careful numbness he'd cultivated. But as he crested the final ridge and saw the cabin below, with smoke rising from the chimney, saw the garden where new sections had been cleared, saw laundry hanging on a line he didn't remember having, something loosened in his chest. The cabin looked lived in, looked like a home instead of just a place to sleep between days of solitary work. Lena came out when she heard the horses, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. The children poured out behind her, all 4 of them healthy, moving with energy that 3 days ago would have seemed impossible. "You're back," she called, and there was relief in her voice she didn't try to hide. "Said I would be." He dismounted, and immediately Thomas and James were there, eyes wide at the pack horse loaded with goods. "What'd you bring?" Thomas asked. "Supplies, food, cloth, some other things." Sarah appeared at his elbow, quieter than her brothers, but just as curious. Did the trip go all right? Fine. No trouble. He started unloading, and Lena moved to help, the baby secured against her chest in a sling she'd fashioned from what looked like an old shirt. You didn't have to buy so much, she said quietly, as box after box came off the pack horse. Had a list. Bought what was on it. Ethan, we'll argue about money later. Right now, let's get this inside before something spoils. They carried everything into the cabin, the children helping with lighter parcels. Ethan watched Lena's face as she unpacked, the way her eyes widened at the bolts of cloth, the careful way she touched the needles and thread like they were precious things. This is too much, she said finally. It's what's needed. I can't repay. Then don't. Or work it off, or we'll figure something else out. He met her eyes. Lena, I didn't buy this expecting repayment. I bought it because children need to eat and wear clothes that fit, because you can't make this place livable with nothing to work with. Simple as that. She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. You're a good man, Ethan Cole. I'm just a man. Good doesn't have much to do with it. But he saw her smile slightly as she turned back to the supplies, organizing them with the same systematic efficiency she'd brought to the garden. That evening, after supper made from fresh supplies, real bread, bacon that wasn't rancid, dried apples stewed with sugar, Lena brought out the cloth and spread it across the table. I'll need to measure the children, she said. Make patterns. If you've got paper, use what you need. She worked as the children got ready for bed, measuring Sarah against the cloth, marking with a piece of charcoal. Her hands moved with the confidence of long practice, and Ethan realized she must have made all their clothes before, back when they had a home and resources. You're good at that, he observed. Had to be. Store-bought clothes cost too much for 4 growing children. Learned from my mother, and she learned from hers. Lena cut a length of thread with her teeth. This cloth, it's good quality, better than I usually worked with. Horace said it would wear well. It will. Make clothes that last. She glanced at him. Thank you for all of it. I know I keep saying that, but don't have to keep saying it. Maybe I need to. For myself, if not for you. She set down the scissors. While you were gone, I did a lot of thinking about what happens next, about what I want versus what's possible. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. And I don't want to be a burden. Don't want my children growing up thinking charity's the same as home. She met his eyes directly. But I also don't want to leave here out of pride when staying might be better for everyone. So what are you saying? I'm saying I'd like to stay. For a while at least. Help you work this land, make something of it. In exchange for shelter and food and... She gestured around the cabin. Safety. A chance to let my children be children again instead of survivors. That's all? What else would there be? Ethan was quiet, uncertain how to articulate the thought forming. Partnership, maybe. You work the garden. I'll handle the larger repairs. We split the produce, share the work, make this a working arrangement instead of one person's charity. Lena considered this. Partners. Equal stake in what we build. Much as it can be when I already own the land. The land's worth nothing if it's not worked. I'd be bringing value. She extended her hand. Partners, then. We work together, build something worth having, and when the time comes that one of us wants different, we part fair with no hard feelings. Ethan took her hand, felt the calluses that matched his own, the firm grip of someone who understood work. Fair terms. They shook on it, and something settled in the cabin. An agreement that turned temporary into something more concrete, gave shape to what had been undefined. From the loft came Sarah's voice. Mama, can we really stay? Lena looked up at her daughter's face, peering down from above. For now, yes. We're staying. Good. Sarah's face split into the first real smile Ethan had seen from her. I like it here. After the children were asleep, Ethan sat outside looking at stars while Lena finished her sewing inside. Through the window he could see her bent over the cloth, needle moving in steady rhythm, creating something from raw material. He thought about the handshake, about the agreement they'd made, about how easily he'd said partnership when 3 days ago the idea of sharing anything would have sent him running, but there was something right about it too. Something that felt less like losing control and more like gaining purpose. For 3 years, he'd worked this land with no real goal beyond survival. Now there was a garden to expand, a barn to shore up, children who needed stability. A woman who looked at him like he was a man instead of a ghost. The door opened and Lena stepped out, wrapping her arms against the night's chill. "Beautiful night," she said. "They all are out here. Once you get used to the emptiness." "Is it empty, though? Or is it just space waiting to be filled?" She sat on the step beside him. "I've been thinking about what you said, about partnership, about making something worth having." "Having second thoughts?" "No, just wondering what that looks like. Long term." Ethan was quiet, watching the stars. "Honestly, I don't know. Never planned that far ahead." "Me neither. Daniel always did the planning, and most of it was terrible." She laughed softly. "But maybe that's all right. Maybe we just work day by day and see what builds." "That's a lot of uncertainty." "Life's uncertain. At least this uncertainty comes with a roof and a well." She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "I'm going to sleep. Tomorrow I want to start on those clothes, and I need good light for cutting." "Lena," she turned back, "I'm glad you're staying. Glad we worked this out." Her smile was tired but genuine. "Me too, Ethan. Me too." After she went inside, Ethan sat alone with his thoughts and the stars. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, and his horse answered with a soft nicker from the barn. Night sounds of a place that was starting to feel less like exile and more like possibility. He didn't know what would come of this arrangement. Didn't know if partnership would hold or crack under the weight of proximity and difference. Didn't know if the walls he'd built around his heart would stay standing or crumble. But for the first time in 3 years, he was curious enough to find out. Summer deepened into the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and turned work into something you did in careful increments between rest and water. The garden grew despite the drought, or maybe because of Lena's stubborn attention to it. She watered morning and evening, pulled weeds in the relative cool of dawn, coaxed life from soil that wanted to turn to dust. Ethan watched her from where he was re-chinkling the barn wall, amazed at the transformation 3 weeks had brought. The children ran between the cabin and the creek bed with energy that seemed impossible for kids who'd been half dead when he found them. Sarah helped her mother without being asked, her serious face occasionally breaking into smiles when Thomas or James did something ridiculous. Even Grace had filled out, her cries stronger, her grip on Lena's finger fierce with new vitality. The cabin itself had changed too. Clothes hung on the line Lena had strung between 2 posts. Small dresses and shirts she'd sewn from the cloth he'd bought, her stitches neat and tight. The inside smelled different now, like bread baking and coffee always ready, like the soap she made from lard and lye, like life being lived instead of time being endured. "You're staring again," Lena called from the garden, not looking up from the bean plants she was staking, just thinking. About? About how much noise 4 children can make. It was true, though not what he'd actually been thinking. "Used to be I could hear myself breathe out here." She laughed, the sound carrying across the yard. "You complaining?" "Observing." That's what Daniel always said when he was complaining, but didn't want to admit it. She stood, arching her back against the strain of bending. "Though he usually had more cause than you do, those 4 could drive a saint to cursing. They're good kids." "They are. Better than they have right to be, considering." She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Sarah's been asking about school, whether there's one nearby." Ethan set down his trowel. "Town has a schoolhouse. Teacher comes through October to April when weather permits." "That's months away." "Could teach her some yourself. You read and write, obviously." "Obviously," Lena said with dry humor, "though my education wasn't what you'd call extensive. Basic letters, enough arithmetic to manage household accounts, scripture whether I wanted it or not." "More than a lot of people have." Ethan climbed down from the ladder he'd been working from. "I've got some books in the cabin. Nothing fancy, but Sarah might like them." "You read?" "Taught myself mostly. Winter nights get long alone. Books helped pass the time." He crossed to the well and drew up water, drinking deep before offering the dipper to Lena. "Had a wife who loved reading. After she—" He stopped, the words still kitching 3 years later. kept her books. Couldn't bring myself to sell them. Lena took the dipper, her expression softening. What was her name? Your wife. Rebecca. And your daughter? Emma. She was 5. He stared into the well's dark opening. Same age as Thomas now. Sometimes, when he laughs, it sounds like... He broke off, jaw tight. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. No, it's all right. Been 3 years. Should be able to say their names without... He gestured vaguely at his chest, at the tightness there. Without this... Lena set down the dipper and touched his arm briefly, a gesture of understanding rather than pity. Grief doesn't follow rules about should. Daniel's been dead over a month, and sometimes I forget he's gone. Wake up expecting to hear him snoring or complaining about breakfast. Then I remember, and it's like learning it new all over again. You miss him? She was quiet for a moment, her hand still on his arm. I miss having a partner. Even a bad one is better than none when you're trying to survive. She pulled her hand back. But Miss Daniel himself? The man who drank our money and left us struggling, who maybe got careless enough to burn down our home. She shook her head. Can't honestly say I do. That's fair. Is it though? Shouldn't I feel more? Shouldn't there be... She struggled for words. Something besides relief mixed with anger? You feel what you feel, no should about that either. From the cabin came a wail, Grace awake from her nap and wanting attention. Lena sighed. Duty calls, but Ethan, thank you for listening, for not judging. Nothing to judge. She smiled slightly and headed for the cabin, and Ethan returned to his work with the barn wall. But their conversation stayed with him, the easy way they'd talked about hard things, the comfort in shared grief even when the circumstances were different. He was getting too comfortable with her presence, with all of their presences. That was dangerous. Comfort led to attachment. Attachment led to vulnerability. And vulnerability led to the kind of pain he'd sworn never to risk again. But watching Lena lift Grace from the cabin, seeing her sway gently while the baby settled, he couldn't quite make himself care about the danger. That evening, after supper, Ethan brought down the box of books he'd kept stored in the loft. Rebecca's books, most of them, though he'd added a few of his own over the years. He set the box on the table and Sarah approached slowly, reverently, like the books might disappear if she moved too fast. Can I really look at them? She asked. That's why I brought them down. He pulled out a volume, simple children's tales, nothing fancy. This one might be a good start. Sarah took it with careful hands, opening the cover like it was made of glass. Her lips moved as she read the first page, sounding out words she didn't know, skipping over others with the confidence of familiarity. She reads well, Lena observed, nursing Grace while watching her daughter. Mama taught me, Sarah said without looking up. Before... She stopped, the before hanging unspoken. I can keep teaching you, Lena said. We'll make time each day. You and the boys too, Thomas. James, you need your letters. I don't like sitting still, James complained. Nobody's asking what you like. I'm telling you what you need. Lena's voice had that particular tone mothers developed, the one that brooked no argument. Education is the one thing nobody can take from you. Not fire, not drought, not bad fortune. What's in your head stays there. Thomas looked at Ethan. Do you think we should learn letters? I think your mother's right. What's in your head stays there, and that's worth something. Then I'll learn, Thomas decided with the easy acceptance of a child who trusted the adults around him. They fell into a rhythm after that, evenings spent with Sarah reading aloud while Lena sewed and the boys played quiet games on the floor. Ethan worked on harness that needed mending, or sharpened tools, or simply sat and listened to Sarah's voice stumbling through stories about animals that talked and children who had adventures. It felt domestic, felt like family, and that scared him more than he wanted to admit. The heat broke in late July with storms that rolled across the plains like declarations of war, thunder that shook the cabin walls, lightning that turned night to day in jagged bursts, rain that fell so hard it sounded like gravel hitting the roof. Ethan woke to Thomas shaking his shoulder in the barn, the boy's face white with fear. Mama says, come quick, the roof's leaking bad. He grabbed his boots and ran through rain that soaked him before he'd crossed half the yard. Inside the cabin, water poured through a crack in the roof he'd thought was sealed, pooling on the floor near the table. Lena had moved the children to the far corner, away from the leak, but water was spreading fast. "When did it start?" Ethan shouted over the thunder. "5 minutes ago. Small drip then." She gestured at the steady stream. "This." He climbed to the loft and found the problem immediately. A section of roof where the seal had failed, water running down the support beam and across the boards. No way to fix it properly in the dark with rain hammering down, but he could slow it. "Pass me that bucket," he called down to Lena. She handed it up, and he positioned it to catch most of the flow, then stuffed rags into the worst gaps. It wasn't perfect, but it helped. The stream became a drip, manageable if not solved. Back on the ground floor, soaked and dripping, he found Lena mopping water with every spare cloth she could find. The children huddled on the bed, wide-eyed and quiet. "I'll fix it proper when the rain stops," Ethan said. "For now, we've got it contained." "Thank you." Lena wrung out a rag into the bucket. "I didn't know it was that bad up there." "Neither did I. Must have been weak longer than I thought. Just took real rain to show it." They worked together cleaning up the water, creating a perimeter of dry floor around the wet center. The storm raged outside, wind howling around the cabin corners, but inside they built a small island of control over chaos. When the floor was as dry as they could make it, Lena sent the children back to the loft with instructions to stay away from the leak. Then she collapsed into a chair, exhausted. "Feel like we just fought a battle," she said. "Kind of did." Ethan poured coffee from the pot that was miraculously still warm. "Storm like this, everything becomes a fight. Keeping dry, keeping safe, keeping the panic down. The children were scared. They did good, though. Thomas came and got me, no crying or carrying on. That takes courage." Lena smiled, pride softening the worry in her face. "They're brave kids. Braver than they should have to be. Brave runs in the family, I'd say." She looked at him over her coffee cup, something shifting in her expression. "You think I'm brave?" "I know you are. Woman who survives what you survived, keeps 4 children alive through it, then agrees to stay in a stranger's cabin and work land that's not hers?" He shook his head. "That's not courage. I don't know what is." "Courage makes it sound noble. Mostly I was just too stubborn to die." "Sometimes that's the same thing." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the rain's rhythm change from assault to steady pour. The leak dripped into the bucket with musical regularity, a counterpoint to the storm. "Ethan," Lena said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why'd you really help us? And don't say because we needed it. Lots of people need help and don't get it." He was quiet, considering how to answer honestly. "Because when I saw you in those ruins, holding your children, waiting to die or be saved." He stopped, searching for words. "You reminded me of Rebecca. Last time I saw her, she was holding Emma just like you held Grace. Protective even though there was nothing to protect them from anymore. They were already—" His voice cracked and he steadied it. "Already gone. And I kept thinking, what if someone had been there? What if someone could have helped? Would they? So you helped us because you couldn't help them. Maybe. Or maybe I helped because I wanted to believe someone would have helped them, if they'd needed it, if there'd been a chance." He looked at her directly. "Or maybe I'm just selfish, and helping you helped me feel less useless." "You're not useless. Wasn't much use to my family. You were in town. You couldn't have known." Lena leaned forward, her voice intense. "Ethan, you can't carry guilt for being alive. Trust me. I've tried. It doesn't work. Just makes everything heavier." "How do you put it down then?" "I don't know. Haven't figured that part out yet." She smiled sadly. "But maybe working toward something instead of running from something helps. Maybe building something new matters more than what burned." The rain eased as dawn approached, tapering to drizzle, then mist. Ethan climbed to the roof in the gray light and found the damage worse than he'd thought. Not just the seal, but several boards rotted through, the whole section needing replacement. Lena came out with coffee as he climbed down, her hair loose around her shoulders, her feet bare in the muddy yard. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough I need to go back to town. Get lumber, proper shingles." He accepted the coffee gratefully. "Can't leave it like this. Next rain will be worse." "When will you go?" Tomorrow if the road's dry enough. Today if they don't, and I don't want to wait. I can manage things here? I know you can. He looked at the cabin, at the damage that was his responsibility. I should have checked it better. Should have known. Should doesn't help any more than guilt. She touched his arm, the same brief gesture from before. You fix it now, that's what matters. He left mid-morning, pushing through mud that grabbed at his horse's hooves and made every mile exhausting. But he reached Sweetwater by nightfall, put his horse up at the livery, and spent the night at Rachel Morrison's hotel. She cornered him at breakfast, curiosity bright in her eyes. How are those people you're helping? The woman and her children? Doing well. They're settled. Settled as in staying, or settled as in getting ready to move on. Ethan sipped his coffee, buying time. Staying, for now at least. Rachel's smile could have lit the whole dining room. Good. That's real good, Ethan. Place like yours needs life in it. Been too quiet too long. It's a working arrangement. She helps with the land, I provide shelter. Nothing more. Rachel's tone suggested she didn't believe a word of it. And how's that working out, the arrangement? Fine. She's a hard worker, good with the garden, good with organizing. Children are settling in. Children need a father figure. You filling that role? He stopped, unsure what he was. I'm just there, that's all. Being there's more than most men manage. Rachel poured more coffee. My late husband, he was there in body but not much else. Always had his mind on the next thing, the next opportunity. Never just present with what was in front of him. She looked at Ethan meaningfully. You strike me as a man who pays attention to what's in front of him. Don't know about that. I do, seeing how you are. Careful, thoughtful, kind even when you don't want to be. She patted his hand. That woman's lucky to have found you. Those children, too. Ethan left before Rachel could dig deeper, heading to the general store where Horace had the lumber ready and waiting. Heard you had storm damage, Horace said as they loaded boards onto a rented wagon. Roof? How'd you hear that? Rachel, she hears everything, that woman. Horace tied down the load. Got enough here to fix it proper. Maybe reinforce the whole roof while you're at it. Old cabin like that, probably all the boards are getting weak. Can't afford to replace the whole roof. Not saying replace. Just reinforce the weak spots while you're up there anyway. Little bit of prevention saves a lot of repair later. It was good advice, and Ethan took it. He bought extra lumber, more nails, tar paper for underneath. By the time he was finished, he'd spent more than he'd planned, but less than a complete disaster would cost. The trip back took 2 days with the loaded wagon, road still soft from rain. He arrived at the cabin to find Lena and Sarah in the garden, the boys playing near the creek bed under their mother's watchful eye. Everything looked peaceful, orderly, functioning smoothly without him. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it made him uneasy in ways he couldn't quite name. You're back, Lena said, straightening from the bean plants. Get what you needed? And more. Going to reinforce the whole roof while I'm fixing the leak. That sounds expensive. Rather expensive now than catastrophic later. He gestured to the garden. How'd things go here? Fine. Quiet. Couple coyotes came sniffing around, but I fired the rifle in the air and they ran off. But, she said it matter-of-factly, like defending the homestead was just another chore. Garden's producing good. We'll have beans to can soon, squash in a few weeks. That's good work. It's just work. But she smiled like the praise meant something. Children missed you. Thomas asked every day when you'd be back. Just Thomas? Her smile widened. All right. We all wondered. Place feels different when you're gone. Different how? Less solid somehow, like we're guests instead of... She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Instead of people who belong. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he focused on unloading the wagon. But her words stayed with him as he worked, the idea that his presence made them feel like they belonged, the weight of that, the responsibility, and the strange warmth of it. He spent the next week on the roof, tearing off damaged boards and replacing them with new lumber, reinforcing weak spots, laying down tar paper for extra protection. It was hard work in the summer heat, but there was satisfaction in it too, fixing something properly, making it stronger than before. Lena brought him water and food at midday, climbing the ladder to sit on the roof beside him while he ate. "Looks good," she said, surveying his work. "Solid. Should last another 20 years if I did it right." "You planning to be here 20 years from now?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know. Are you?" "Depends." "On what?" She looked out across the land, the garden growing strong, the barn standing straight after his repairs, the grass rolling away to distant horizons. "On whether this stops feeling like borrowed time and starts feeling like home." "What would make it feel like home?" "I don't know yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe I'm just destined to be restless." She turned to him. "What about you? This place feel like home?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "It did once. First year after Rebecca and Emma died, I couldn't stay in Jackson Hole. Everything reminded me of them. So I came here, to the middle of nowhere, and it felt safe. Empty enough I couldn't get hurt again." He ran his hand over the new lumber. "But empty's not the same as home, just took me a while to figure that out." "And now?" "Now it's less empty. Question is whether that's better or just scarier." Lena laughed softly. Honest answer, at least. They sat in comfortable silence, sharing the canteen of water, watching the children play below. Sarah was teaching her brothers some game that involved running in circles and shouting. Grace slept in the shade of the wagon, protected from the sun by a canopy Lena had rigged. "They're happy here," Lena observed. "Happier than they were before, even before the fire." Daniel he didn't make things easy, always angry about something, always feeling like the world owed him more than he got. That's a hard way to live. It was. For all of us. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "I married him when I was 16. He was 25, seemed sophisticated, promised me a good life. I was stupid enough to believe him. 16's young for that kind of decision. Too young. But my parents approved and I thought I was in love, so..." She shrugged. "By the time I realized what I'd actually agreed to, I had Sarah on the way and leaving wasn't an option." "You could have left." "Could I?" She looked at him. Woman alone with a baby, no money, no family, who'd take me back after I'd made my choice? Where would I go? What would I do? She shook her head. "No, I made my bed, had to lie in it, just did my best to make it comfortable as possible for the children." "That why you don't mourn him much?" "Part of it. Other part is just exhaustion. I spent 18 years mourning the life I could have had. Don't have energy left to mourn the man who kept me from it." Ethan understood that kind of exhaustion, the weariness of carrying what-ifs and might-have-beens. "You get a second chance now. Build whatever life you want." "With what, though?" "I've got nothing, Ethan. No money, no property, no skills except keeping house and raising children." She gestured around. "This partnership we have, it's generous, and I'm grateful. But it's still your land, your cabin, your charity." "It's not charity. You work for your keep. Work that benefits you as much as me. That's not the same as having something that's mine." He was quiet, understanding what she was really saying. She wanted ownership, wanted agency, wanted to build something that couldn't be taken away by someone else's whim or generosity. And he didn't know how to give her that without fundamentally changing the arrangement between them. Before he could respond, Thomas's shout cut through the air, sharp with fear. "Mama, someone's coming!" They both moved immediately, Ethan sliding down the roof and dropping to the ground, Lena scrambling down the ladder. Sarah had already gathered her brothers, all three children clustered near the cabin door. Lena scooped up Grace while Ethan shaded his eyes against the sun, looking toward the trail. A rider approached at a steady pace, man on a good horse, wearing what looked like town clothes despite the dust. He raised his hand in greeting as he came closer, non-threatening but official, in a way that made Ethan's instincts prickle. "Mr. Cole?" The man reined in near the cabin. "Ethan Cole?" "That's me. Who's asking?" "Name's Marshall Hewitt, out of Denver District, working this territory." He tipped his hat to Lena. "Ma'am, sorry to disturb your day." "What brings a marshal all the way out here?" Ethan kept his voice neutral, but his hand rested on his belt near where he'd normally carry a gun if he'd been wearing one. "Looking for a woman, Mrs. Lena Ward. Understand she might be in these parts." Hewitt's gaze shifted to Lena, assessment in his eyes. "That you, ma'am?" Lena's face went carefully blank. I'm Lena Ward. Then I'm afraid I need to have a conversation with you about your late husband's affairs. The silence that followed stretched tight as wire. Lena's arms tightened around Grace, and Ethan saw Sarah move closer to her mother, instinctively protective despite being only 8 years old. What affairs? Lena's voice was steady, but Ethan heard the tension beneath it. My husband died in a fire. His affairs died with him. Marshal Hewitt dismounted slowly, careful in his movements like a man who knew sudden gestures caused problems. That's what we thought too, ma'am, until certain items started showing up in Denver pawn shops, items that were reported stolen from a mining company 3 months back. I don't know anything about stolen items. Didn't say you did, but your husband's name came up in the investigation. Seems he was working at the mine when the theft occurred, left employment sudden-like right after. Hewitt pulled a folded paper from his coat. Mine owner filed a claim. Says Daniel Ward took company property valued at near $2,000. Ethan felt his chest tighten. $2,000 was enough to hang a man or see his widow prosecuted if they thought she was involved. Daniel worked lots of places, Lena said carefully. Never stayed long anywhere. I don't know what he did at any of them, just that he brought home less money than he promised and more excuses than I could count. So you're saying you had no knowledge of any theft? I'm saying my husband didn't tell me his business. I kept house, raised children, and tried to make meals out of whatever money he saw fit to provide. Her voice hardened. If he stole something, that's on him, not on me. Hewitt studied her with cop's eyes that had seen too many lies to be fooled by new ones. But he must have seen truth in Lena's face because he nodded slightly. I believe you, ma'am. Most wives don't know half what their husbands get up to. He refolded the paper. But the mine owner, he's not as understanding. Says the theft occurred and Ward's the likely culprit, which means the stolen property or its value should be recovered from Ward's estate. Estate? Lena laughed, bitter and sharp. Marshal, do I look like a woman with an estate? Everything I owned burned. I've got 4 children, the clothes we're wearing, and the charity of Mr. Cole here. That's my estate. The mine owner claims Ward had money, says he was seen spending freely in Denver saloons before he disappeared. Then he spent it on whiskey and cards, same as he always did. There's nothing left. No hidden money, no stolen goods, nothing. Lena's voice rose slightly, fear cracking through her control. You want to search what little I have? Go ahead. You won't find anything because there's nothing to find. Hewitt looked uncomfortable now, a lawman caught between duty and conscience. Ma'am, I don't doubt your word, but I've got a job to do, and that job says I need to investigate this claim thoroughly. How thoroughly? Ethan spoke for the first time since the accusation started, his voice flat and hard. You planning to tear apart my cabin looking for things that aren't there? Traumatize 4 children who've already lost everything, all because some mine owner wants someone to blame? Mr. Cole, I understand your concern, but do you? Because from where I'm standing, you're about to punish a woman for her dead husband's sins, a woman who's got nothing except what she can work for. Ethan stepped forward, putting himself slightly between Hewitt and Lena. You said yourself you believe she didn't know about any theft. So what exactly are you investigating? Hewitt's jaw tightened. The law says I need to verify there's no stolen property in Mrs. Ward's possession. That means I need to look. Then look fast and get it done, Ethan said. But you do it respectful. Those children don't need to see their mother treated like a criminal. The marshal nodded slowly. Fair enough, Mrs. Ward. If you'll show me what belongings you have, we can settle this quick. Lena looked at Ethan, something passing between them. Trust maybe, or just the acknowledgement that she had no choice. She handed Grace to Sarah and said, Children, go wait by the garden. Sarah, keep your brothers there until I call you. Sarah's face was pale but determined. Yes, Mama. The 3 older children walked to the garden with Thomas looking back over his shoulder, his small face confused and frightened. Grace started to cry in Sarah's arms, sensing the tension even if she couldn't understand it. Inside the cabin, Lena showed Hewitt everything she had, the few clothes she'd sewn, the children's belongings that had survived the fire, the supplies Ethan had bought. The marshal went through it all methodically, checking pockets, feeling for hidden compartments, even examining the children's toys. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. When he moved to the loft, Ethan followed, unwilling to let Lena face this alone. The marshal searched through the blankets, checked the floorboards, examined every corner. Still nothing. "The barn too," Hewitt said when they came back down. "Need to check there." Ethan let him out, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. The marshal went through his tools, his tack, the hay in the loft. He even checked the wagon that had brought Lena and the children here, though it was obviously empty and had been for weeks. Finally, standing in the yard with the sun beating down merciless and hot, Hewitt removed his hat and wiped his forehead. "I don't find any evidence of stolen property," he said formally, "and based on Mrs. Ward's circumstances, I'm inclined to believe she had no involvement in or knowledge of her husband's alleged crimes." "Alleged?" Lena repeated. "You're not even sure he did it." "Evidence suggests he did, but proving it now that he's dead?" Hewitt shrugged. "That's harder. The mine owner wants his money back, but I can't squeeze blood from a stone." He looked at Lena with something like sympathy. "I'll file my report saying you're destitute and uninvolved. Should satisfy the legal requirements." "Should?" Ethan caught the uncertainty. "Or will?" "Mr. Cole, I can only do what I can do. I believe Mrs. Ward is innocent of any wrongdoing. I'll say so in my report, but the mine owner has rights too, and if he wants to pursue civil action..." "Civil action for what? You just said she has nothing." "That's for courts to decide, not me." Hewitt put his hat back on. "Mrs. Ward, my advice is to stay put, keep your head down, and pray the mine owner decides pursuing a widow with 4 children isn't worth his time or money." "And if he doesn't decide that?" Lena asked quietly. "Then you might need a lawyer, and you'll definitely need luck." He mounted his horse, settling into the saddle. "I'm sorry I had to do this, truly, but the law's the law." "The law," Ethan said coldly, "seems real good at protecting men with money and real bad at protecting women with nothing." Hewitt's expression darkened. "I don't make the laws, Mr. Cole. I just enforce them best I can." He tipped his hat to Lena. "Ma'am, good luck to you." They watched him ride away, dust rising from his horse's hooves, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the vast quiet of the plains. When he was finally out of sight, Lena sagged like strings had been cut, and Ethan caught her elbow to steady her. "I'm all right," she said, but her voice shook. "You're not. Come sit down." He guided her to the cabin steps, and she sat heavily, her hands trembling in her lap. From the garden, Sarah watched with worried eyes, but Ethan shook his head slightly. "Not yet. Give your mother a minute." "Daniel," Lena said finally, the name coming out like a curse. "Even dead, he's still making my life impossible. What he did isn't your fault. Doesn't matter whose fault it is. I'm the one who'll pay for it." She looked at Ethan with eyes that had gone hard again, defensive. "This changes things. You understand that? If that mine owner comes after me legally, if he tries to take anything, you can't be associated with me. Can't have your property at risk because you're sheltering me. You think I care about that? You should. You've worked for this land, this cabin. You can't lose it because of me." Ethan sat beside her on the step, close enough their shoulders almost touched. "Lena, listen to me. I'm not sending you away because of something your dead husband maybe did. I'm not that kind of man. You don't know what you're risking. I know exactly what I'm risking, and I'm choosing to risk it anyway." He turned to look at her directly. "You're not alone in this. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's what partnership means." Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. "Why? Why would you do that for me? For us?" "Because it's right. Because you deserve someone standing with you instead of running away." He paused, then added quietly, "Because I'm tired of running away." Lena did cry then, silently, tears tracking through the dust on her face. She didn't make a sound, just let them fall while Ethan sat beside her, solid and present in a way that said more than words could. When she'd composed herself, she called the children back. They came running, Thomas and James full of questions, Sarah quiet but clearly frightened. "Is the marshal going to take us away?" Thomas asked. "No, baby, no one's taking you anywhere." Lena pulled him close, then James, gathering her boys against her sides. "The marshal just had questions about your papa, but it's done now. Everything's fine." "Papa did something bad?" James's voice was small. Papa made mistakes, but those are his mistakes, not ours. We didn't do anything wrong. Sarah stood apart, holding Grace, her expression older than 8 had any right to be. What happens if they come back? It was the question they were all thinking, and Lena didn't have a good answer. Ethan saw her struggle with it, saw her trying to find reassurance she didn't feel. If they come back, Ethan said, meeting Sarah's eyes, we'll handle it same as we handled today. Together. Honest. Not backing down. You promise? Thomas asked. I promise. The boy seemed satisfied with that, and James followed his brother's lead. But Sarah's gaze stayed on Ethan a moment longer, measuring, assessing. Then she nodded, a small gesture of trust that felt weighty as gold. That night, after the children were asleep, Lena and Ethan sat outside watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The day's heat was finally breaking, a breeze carrying the smell of growing things from the garden. I should leave, Lena said quietly. Take the children and go somewhere they won't find us. Somewhere Daniel's past can't reach. Where would you go? I don't know. West, maybe. California. Somewhere far enough that Denver mining companies don't matter. California's not far enough. World's getting smaller. Telegraph lines, railroads. You can't outrun information anymore. Ethan shifted on the step. Besides, running just makes you look guilty. Makes them think you have something to hide. I don't have anything. You saw what the marshals saw. Nothing. I know that. You know that. But if you run, suddenly you're suspicious. Better to stay. Let them investigate all they want. Prove there's nothing to find. Lena was quiet for a long moment. You really want us to stay? Even knowing we might bring trouble? Trouble's already here. Question is whether we face it or flee from it. He looked at her. I'm voting for facing it. But it's your choice. Your children. Your life. Except it affects your life too now. Your property. Your peace. Your... She stopped, searching for the word. Your safety. My safety was never the point. I came out here to hide from life, not live it. You and the children, you've reminded me there's a difference. He stood, stretching muscles that had been tense since the marshal arrived. I'm not saying it won't be hard. Might get harder before it gets better. But I'd rather go through hard times with people He paused, uncertain. With people who matter. Than go through easy times alone. Lena stood too, moving close enough he could see her face in the starlight. We matter to you? Yeah, you do. She reached out and took his hand, her grip firm and warm. You matter to us too, to me. She squeezed once, then let go. All right. We stay. We face whatever comes. Together. Together, Ethan agreed. The next weeks passed in uneasy peace. Ethan finished the roof repairs, making the cabin tight and secure against weather and worry. Lena worked the garden with fierce determination, as if growing things could prove her worth, could make her indispensable enough that no court would dare uproot her. The children settled into routine that almost felt normal. Morning chores, afternoon lessons with their mother, evening play before bed. Sarah read her way through Ethan's small library, her hunger for stories insatiable. Thomas and James built elaborate structures from sticks and stones, whole cities rising and falling in the dirt near the barn. Grace grew stronger daily, her laughter becoming as common as her cries. But underneath the normalcy ran a current of tension. Every rider on the horizon made them pause, made Lena's hand move toward the rifle by the door. Every trip to town, and Ethan made fewer than usual, carried the risk of news, of legal papers, of the mine owner's vengeance finding them. Rachel Morrison noticed during one of Ethan's rare visits, cornering him as he loaded supplies. You look like a man waiting for bad news, she observed. Just cautious. About what? That business with the marshal last month? At Ethan's sharp look, she smiled. Honey, I told you, nothing stays secret in a territory this size. Marshall filed his report, had to do it official in town. Word got around. What's the word? That Lena Ward's husband was a thief and she's been questioned. That she's staying with you, which has started some tongues wagging. Rachel's expression turned serious. Some saying she's taking advantage. Others saying you're being noble. A few saying things I won't repeat about unmarried men and women living under one roof. Ethan's jaw tightened. It's not like that. I know it's not. You're too proper and she's too proud. But people see what they want to see. She touched his arm. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm warning you because reputations matter, especially for her. If this goes to court, if that mine owner pushes his claim, her character will matter. And living with a man she's not married to. We're not living together like that. It's a working arrangement. You know that, I know that. But a court? A judge who doesn't know her? Rachel shook her head. They might see it different, might see a woman of questionable morals who could have been involved in her husband's crimes. That's insane. That's the law, or at least how the law gets used against women. She pressed a package into his hands. Take these. Clothes for the children, donated from the church ladies. And Ethan, think about making your arrangement more official, for her sake, if not yours. He rode home with Rachel's words circling in his head like crows, making things official. She meant marriage, obviously, though she'd been too polite to say it outright. Marriage would give Lena legal protection, would make her Ethan's responsibility in the eyes of the law, would silence the gossips. But marriage meant commitment he wasn't sure he could make, meant opening himself to the kind of loss he'd sworn never to risk again, meant admitting that Lena and her children had become more than temporary guests, had become people he couldn't imagine living without. And that terrified him more than any marshal or mine owner. He found Lena in the garden, surrounded by late summer abundance, beans hanging heavy on stakes, squash spreading across the ground, tomatoes just starting to ripen. She looked up as he approached, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Get everything you needed? She asked. More or less. He handed her the package from Rachel. Clothes for the children, church donation. Lena's expression tightened. Charity. Practical help, there's a difference. She opened the package anyway, and he saw her resistance crumble as she lifted out small dresses and shirts, all clean and mended, all clearly outgrown by whoever wore them first, but still with plenty of life left. These are nice, she admitted. Better than I could make right now. She looked at him. Did you have to tell Rachel our business to get these? Rachel already knew our business. Whole town knows, apparently. Marshall's report became public record. Lena's hand stilled on the clothes. What are they saying? That your husband was a thief. That you're living with me. That... He stopped, uncertain how to phrase it. That I'm a woman of loose morals taking advantage of a lonely man? Lena's voice was bitter. I can imagine. I've heard versions of it before. Every time Daniel did something shameful and people looked at me like I should have stopped him somehow. Rachel suggested... Ethan paused, then pushed forward. She suggested we should make our arrangement official, for legal protection, and to stop the gossip. Lena looked at him sharply. Official how? You know how. Say it, Ethan. Don't dance around it. Marriage. The word sat heavy between them. She thinks we should get married. Lena laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course she does. Because a woman can't just live honestly, work fairly, earn her own way. She has to be someone's wife for it to be respectable. She stood, clutching the donated clothes. I'm not marrying you for respectability. I wasn't asking you to. Weren't you? Because it sounded a lot like a suggestion that we should solve my reputation problem by making me legally yours. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? She faced him directly, chin up, eyes fierce. Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're offering marriage as a business arrangement, like it's just another part of our partnership. Sign some papers, change my name, and suddenly I'm protected. Would that be so bad? If it keeps you safe. Yes, because I've already been in a marriage that was just arrangement, where I was property, not partner, where my needs didn't matter as long as I kept house and bore children. Her voice rose. I won't do that again, not even for safety. I would never treat you like property. Maybe not intentionally, but marriage gives you rights over me and my children, legal rights I can't fight, and I've had enough of being someone's legal responsibility. She turned away, gathering the clothes. If we're going to be together, and I'm not saying we should be, it has to be because we want to be. Not because some town gossips think it's proper or some lawyer thinks it's protective. Ethan watched her walk to the cabin, her back straight despite the emotion he knew she was fighting. He'd handled that badly. framed it wrong, made it sound exactly like the cold calculation she'd accused him of. But the truth he was barely ready to admit to himself, was that the idea of marrying Lena didn't feel like calculation. It felt like something he wanted for reasons that had nothing to do with protection or propriety and everything to do with the way she made him laugh when she was frustrated with the garden, the way she sang softly to Grace when she thought no one was listening, the way she looked at him sometimes like he was a man worth knowing instead of a ghost worth pitying. He was falling for her, had probably already fallen, and that scared him worse than any martial or legal threat. That evening, the tension between them was thick enough to choke on. They moved around each other carefully, polite as strangers, while the children watched with worried eyes that said they knew something was wrong, even if they didn't understand what. After supper, Sarah approached Ethan where he sat outside, ostensibly checking the harness but really just avoiding the cabin. "Are you mad at Mama?" she asked quietly. "No, sweetheart. Just had a disagreement." "About us staying?" He looked at her serious face, saw the fear there. "No, never about that. You're staying as long as you want. That's not changing." "Then what?" "Grown-up things. Nothing for you to worry about." Sarah sat beside him on the step, small and solemn. When Papa and Mama disagreed, Papa would leave, sometimes for days. He'd come back smelling like whiskey, and Mama would have a bruise she said came from being clumsy. She looked at Ethan. "You won't do that, will you? You won't hurt her?" The question hit him like a fist. "No, Sarah. I would never hurt your mother, or you, or any of your brothers or sister. Never." "Promise?" "I promise." She leaned against him slightly, a gesture of trust that made his throat tight. "Good. Because Mama's happier here than she ever was before. And I think," she paused, choosing words carefully, "I think she likes you, not just as someone who helps us, as someone who's nice to her." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. Before he could try, Lena appeared in the doorway. "Sarah, bedtime. Go help your brothers get settled." "Yes, Mama." Sarah squeezed Ethan's hand once before going inside. Lena stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the lamplight. "I'm sorry I got angry. You were just trying to help, and She stopped, collecting herself. "I overreacted." "You had cause. I made it sound like a business deal." "Wasn't it, though? Practical solution to a practical problem?" "Maybe when I said it, but—" He stood, moved closer. "Lena, if I was going to marry anyone, it wouldn't be for practical reasons. It would be because I wanted to wake up next to her every morning. Because I wanted to build a life with her, not just a working arrangement. Because I—" He stopped, the words catching. "Because you what?" Her voice was soft now, careful. "Because I care about her. More than I thought I could care about anyone after Rebecca died." Lena's eyes widened slightly. "Ethan, I'm not asking you to marry me. Not right now. Not like this. I'm just saying, if that time comes, if we decide that's what we want, it'll be because we choose it. Not because anyone tells us we should." She stepped off the threshold, close enough he could see the lamplight reflected in her eyes. "And if that time never comes, if we just keep going as we are, then that's fine too. As long as you're here, as long as we're together, that's what matters." Lena reached up and touched his face, her hand gentle against his cheek. "You're a good man, Ethan Cole. Better than you think you are." "I'm just trying not to be worse than I have been." She smiled, sad and sweet. "That's more than most men manage." Her hand dropped. "We should get some sleep. Tomorrow needs doing regardless of tonight's worries." Tomorrow always does. She went inside and Ethan stayed in the yard looking at stars and thinking about choices and chances. About a woman who'd become essential to his days without him noticing when it happened. About children who called his name and trusted his promises. About a future that was starting to look less like exile and more like home. The next morning brought riders. 3 of them this time. Men in suits riding horses that cost more than most families earned in a year. Ethan was at the well when he spotted them, and something in their purposeful approach made his gut tighten. He called to Lena and she came out, wiping her hands on her apron, her face going pale when she saw the men. "Mrs. Lena Ward?" the lead rider called as they approached. "That's me. I'm attorney Martin Spence, representing Continental Mining Company. These are my associates. He didn't bother introducing them. We're here regarding the matter of Daniel Ward's theft and the recovery of stolen property. The marshal already searched, found nothing. The marshal conducted a preliminary investigation. We're here for a more thorough examination. Spence dismounted, pulling papers from his satchel. I have a writ authorizing search of your person, your possessions, and any property you might have hidden on these premises. Ethan stepped forward. This is my property. You have no right. Actually, Mr. Cole, we do. The writ is specific and legal. You can read it if you'd like. Spence held out the papers with the confidence of a man who knew the law was on his side. Ethan read them, his anger building with each line. It was all legal, all proper, all designed to strip away any protection Lena might have. How long will this take? He asked coldly. As long as necessary. We're authorized to search thoroughly, and we will. Lena's hand found Ethan's arm, her grip tight. Let them look. They won't find anything because there's nothing to find, just like before. Mrs. Ward, Spence said with false sympathy, I hope for your sake that's true. Because if we find any evidence of the stolen property, any evidence at all that you knew about or benefited from your husband's theft, the consequences will be severe. Prison time for you. Your children placed in territorial custody. It was a threat dressed as warning, and Ethan saw Lena's face go white. You bastard, he said quietly, threatening her children. I'm simply stating legal fact. Now, shall we begin? The sooner we're done, the sooner we can all move on with our lives. The search took hours. The three men went through everything, every piece of clothing, every dish, every tool. They dug in the garden, tore apart the barn, even examined the children's toys piece by piece. They were thorough and invasive and clearly enjoying the power they held. Through it all, Lena stood silent and still, watching them violate the small life she'd built. The children huddled in the cabin with Sarah holding them together, her young face tight with fury that had no outlet. Ethan stood beside Lena, his presence the only thing he could offer, and felt helpless rage build with every drawer they emptied, every floorboard they pried up. When the sun was westering and the men had found nothing, because there was nothing to find, Spence finally approached them where they waited by the well. It appears you're telling the truth, Mrs. Ward. There's no stolen property here. I told you that. Yes, however, he paused, and Ethan knew whatever came next would be bad. The absence of stolen property doesn't mean the matter is closed. Continental Mining still seeks recovery of their loss. Your husband stole $2,000 worth of gold ore. Someone has to pay that debt. I don't have $2,000. I don't have $2. Then you'll need to find a way to acquire it. We're filing a civil suit against your husband's estate. When we win, and we will win, we'll be entitled to seize any assets that estate might have. What assets? The man died with nothing. Any future assets, then? Any money you might earn, any property you might acquire, until the debt is paid. Spence smiled coldly. Of course, if you'd like to settle this matter more quickly, Continental is willing to accept alternative arrangements. There are always men willing to pay for companionship. A woman with 4 children has few other options for raising that kind of money. The implication was clear and vile, and Ethan moved before thinking, his fist connecting with Spence's jaw hard enough to drop the lawyer into the dirt. The 2 associates rushed forward, but Ethan was already reaching for Spence again, dragging him up by his expensive coat. Say anything like that again, Ethan said, his voice deadly quiet, and I'll kill you. Legal consequences be damned. Ethan, no! Lena grabbed his arm. He's not worth it. Let him go. Spence scrambled backward when Ethan released him, his face already swelling where he'd been hit. That's assault! Witness it, he said to his associates. I'll have you arrested for that. Go ahead. Arrest me. But get off my property first. This isn't over, not by a long shot. Spence mounted his horse with shaking hands. You'll hear from us, Mrs. Ward, and Mr. Cole, enjoy your freedom while it lasts. They rode away fast, dust boiling up from their horses' hooves. When they were gone, Ethan turned to find Lena staring at him with wide eyes. You hit him, she said. Yeah. They could arrest you for that. Probably will. Then why? Because no one talks about you that way. No one. He flexed his hand, knuckles already starting to bruise. I'm sorry if I made things worse, but I'm not sorry I hit him. Lena laughed suddenly, a slightly hysterical sound that turned into a sob. She pressed her hands to her face, shoulders shaking, and Ethan pulled her against his chest, holding her while she broke apart from the strain of holding together. It's all right, he murmured. Let it out. I've got you. She cried hard, the kind of crying that came from weeks of fear and uncertainty finally finding release. When she finally quieted, she stayed against his chest, her voice muffled by his shirt. What are we going to do? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. They're going to take everything, even things I haven't earned yet. How do I fight that? Ethan didn't have an answer, but standing there with Lena in his arms, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't letting them destroy her. Whatever it took, whatever it cost, he was going to find a way to protect her and her children. Even if it meant finally admitting that she'd become more than a guest, more than a partner, more than someone he'd rescued on a burning summer day. She'd become the reason he wanted to stop running from life and start fighting for one. That night, after the children had finally settled into restless sleep, Ethan sat at the table with paper and pencil, trying to calculate possibilities that kept coming up short. $2,000 might as well have been $2 million for all the chance he had of raising it. His savings were nearly depleted from supplies and repairs. The land produced enough to live on, but not enough to sell for significant cash. Even if he worked every job in Sweetwater for a year, he wouldn't come close. Lena sat across from him, nursing Grace, her face drawn with exhaustion that went bone deep. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. It's not your debt. It's not yours either. The law says different. The law's wrong. He threw down the pencil, frustrated. There has to be a way to fight this, some legal argument, some precedent. With what lawyer? What money for fees? Lena shifted Grace to her shoulder, patting the baby's back. Ethan, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but maybe it's time to accept reality. I can't win this fight. Continental Mining has money, lawyers, the law on their side. I have nothing. You have me. She looked at him with eyes that held too much sadness for someone who should still have years of hope ahead. And what can you do against a mining company? Hit their lawyer again? That worked out real well today. I'm not sorry about that. I know, but sorry or not, it doesn't change anything. She stood carefully, settling Grace into the cradle Ethan had built last week. The best thing I can do now is disappear. Take the children somewhere Continental can't find us. Let this blow over, or at least buy some time. Running just delays the problem. Maybe delay is all I can hope for. She looked around the cabin, and he saw longing in her face. I wish I could stay. I wish. She stopped, collecting herself. But wishing doesn't pay debts or change laws. Before Ethan could respond, a knock sounded at the door. They both froze. It was full dark outside, well past the hour for social calls. Another knock, firmer this time. Ethan grabbed the rifle from above the door and opened it to find Marshal Hewitt standing in the lamplight spilling from inside. Evening, Mr. Cole. Mrs. Ward. Hewitt's expression was apologetic. I'm sorry to come so late, but I've got a warrant for your arrest, Mr. Cole. Assault on Attorney Martin Spence. Figured you'd come eventually. You're not going to fight it? Would fighting change the outcome? No, I suppose not. Hewitt glanced at Lena. Ma'am, I'm sorry about all this. Wish it was different. When does he have to come with you? Lena's voice was steady, despite the fear Ethan could see in her eyes. Now, preferably. But I can give you a few minutes to get things settled here. Ethan set the rifle down and turned to Lena. You'll be all right until I get back? When will that be? Hearing's in 3 days, Hewitt said. Judge will probably fine you heavy and let you go. Maybe a few days in jail if Spence pushes for it. 3 days minimum, possibly more. Ethan looked at the children sleeping in the loft, at Lena standing alone with an infant in a cradle and trouble closing in from all sides. I'll manage, Lena said, reading his concern. We've managed worse. There's money in the jar by the stove. Not much, but enough for basics. Rachel Morrison in town knows your situation. If you need anything before I'm back, go to her. Ethan, I'll be fine, just... She stepped close, lowering her voice. Don't do anything stupid trying to be noble. Pay the fine, serve the time if you have to, and come home. Don't make this worse. Home, he repeated, and something in his chest loosened at hearing her call it that. I'll come back soon as I can. She reached up and touched his face, the gesture tender enough to make Hewitt look away politely. Be safe. You too. The ride to town was quiet, Hewitt respecting Ethan's need for silence. They reached Sweetwater near midnight, and the marshal locked Ethan in a cell that was more courtesy than security. The door barely latched, the window unbarred. I'll bring breakfast in the morning, Hewitt said. And Ethan, for what it's worth, Spence had that punch coming. Half the town thinks so. Other half thinks you should have hit him harder. Despite everything, Ethan smiled. Good to know. Alone in the cell, he lay on the hard cot and thought about Lena's face when she'd touched him goodbye. Thought about Sarah's fear that he'd leave like her father had. Thought about 4 children who'd started to feel like his own, and a woman who'd become more necessary than breathing. He'd spent 3 years trying not to need anyone, trying not to let anyone need him. And in 2 months, Lena and her children had demolished every wall he'd built, leaving him vulnerable in ways that should terrify him, but somehow didn't, because being vulnerable with them felt less frightening than being safe alone. Morning brought Rachel Morrison with a basket of food and news that spread across her face like weather. The whole town's talking about you punching Spence, she said, passing bread and cheese through the bars. Opinions are divided on whether you're a fool or a hero. Probably both. Probably. She settled into the chair outside the cell. But here's what else people are talking about. That civil suit against Lena. Word is Continental's being vindictive, going after a widow who had nothing to do with her husband's crimes. They are. Well, some folks don't like it. Mining companies already take enough from this territory without going after innocent women and children. Rachel leaned forward. There's been talk at church. Collections, maybe? Folks putting in what they can to help with the debt. Ethan's throat tightened. That's generous, but $2,000 is more than Sweetwater could raise in a year. Maybe, but even a little helps, doesn't it? Shows Lena she's not alone? Rachel studied him. You care about her, more than just neighborly helping. Is that obvious? To anyone with eyes, yes, she smiled. And before you start worrying about propriety, most folks think it's nice. You've been alone too long, and she needs someone steady after that wastrel husband. Seems like you fit each other. Not sure Lena sees it that way. Then you're blind as well as stubborn. That woman looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. Rachel stood, gathering her basket. Hearings tomorrow. Judge Carson's fair but strict. Pay your fine, keep your temper, and you'll be home in 2 days. Thanks, Rachel, for everything. That's what neighbors do. We take care of each other. She paused at the door. And Ethan, when you get out, maybe think about making things official with Lena. Not for propriety or legal protection, though both matter, but because life's too short and uncertain to waste time dancing around what you really want. She left before he could respond, but her words circled in his head for the rest of the day. What he really wanted. He'd spent 3 years not wanting anything except to be left alone with his grief. But now he wanted mornings with Lena's coffee and children's laughter. Wanted to fix the barn with Thomas handing him nails and James asking endless questions. Wanted to watch Sarah read by lamplight and hear Grace's delighted squeals when something amused her. Wanted Lena beside him not just as partner, but as something more. Wife, companion, the person who knew his worst moments and chose to stay anyway. The hearing the next day was brief and predictable. Judge Carson listened to Spence's complaint, heard Ethan's admission of guilt tempered by explanation of provocation, and rendered judgment with the weariness of a man who'd seen too many stupid conflicts. Mr. Cole, assaulting an attorney is serious regardless of what he said to provoke you. However, given Attorney Spence's reputation for inflammatory remarks and your previously clean record, I'm inclined toward leniency. He banged his gavel. $50 fine and 3 days served. Since you've been in custody 2 days already, you'll be released tomorrow morning. Spence sputtered protests, but the judge ignored him, already moving to the next case. As Ethan was led back to his cell, he caught Spence's glare and smiled coldly. Worth every penny of the fine. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Horace Kimball appeared at the cell with papers in hand and determination on his weathered face. "Got something for you to look at," Horace said, spreading documents on the chair outside the bars. "Been doing some research into this continental mining situation." "What kind of research?" "The legal kind. Turns out there's precedent for challenging corporate claims against widows in territorial court. Case from Montana 3 years back where a mining company tried similar tactics. Court ruled that debts incurred by the husband through criminal activity don't transfer to the widow if she had no knowledge or benefit." Ethan felt hope stir cautiously. Lena had neither. Exactly. And the marshal's report states as much. If we can get a good lawyer to argue the precedent, good lawyers cost money we don't have. Maybe not as much as you think. I talked to Frank Henderson. He's young, fresh from law school back east, trying to build a practice here. Said he'd take the case for a reduced fee if we can raise some money up front. How much? $200. Church collection's already at $75, and I'm putting in $25 myself. Few other folks have pledged amounts. We're close, Ethan. Real close. $200 was still a fortune, but it was possible in a way $2,000 never could be. Why are you doing this? You barely know Lena. Because it's right. Because Continental's been pushing folks around in this territory for years, and it's time someone pushed back, and because, Horace smiled slightly, because you're one of us now, whether you meant to be or not, you and Lena both. We take care of our own. After Horace left, Ethan sat in the cell and felt something shift in his understanding of community, of belonging. He'd thought being alone protected him, kept him safe from the pain of connection. But these people, Rachel, Horace, the church ladies he'd never met, even Marshall Hewitt with his apologetic arrests, they were proving that connection could be strength instead of weakness, that sometimes being vulnerable meant being supported. Released the next morning, Ethan rode home with the sun climbing toward noon and hope building with each mile. He had news that might change everything, a plan that might actually work, and a sudden clarity about what he wanted if they could just get through this crisis. He crested the ridge above the cabin and his heart stopped. Smoke rose from the chimney as usual, laundry hung on the line, but there were horses tied near the barn. 4 of them, saddled and waiting. Ethan kicked his horse into a run, covering the last distance at a gallop. He reached the cabin to find Spence and 3 hired men inside. Lena backed against the far wall with all 4 children clustered behind her. The rifle was in Spence's hands, taken before she could use it. "Mr. Cole," Spence said with vicious satisfaction, his jaw still swollen from Ethan's punch. "How convenient. Now you can watch as we seize assets to cover Mrs. Ward's debt." "You can't seize anything. She owns nothing. Actually, upon further research, it appears Mrs. Ward has been working this land. Territorial law says improvements made by labor give the laborer a claim to compensation. Your garden, for instance, she planted and tended it. That produces legally hers, which means it's legally ours to collect against the debt." It was legal sophistry at its worst, twisting homestead law into something it was never meant to be. But Ethan could see Spence believed it would hold, or at least cause enough trouble to satisfy his spite. "Take the produce then and get out," Ethan said flatly. "Oh, we will. But there's also the matter of her labor itself. She's been working here for weeks. That labor has value, and Continental is entitled to claim it until the debt is satisfied." Lena's voice cut through, sharp with fury. "You're saying I'm indentured? That I have to work for Continental until I've earned $2,000? "In effect, yes. Though we'll be generous. We'll credit your labor at standard rates. Should only take you 4 or 5 years of full-time work." Spence smiled. "Of course, we'll need to place your children in territorial custody during that time, since you won't be able to care for them while working off the debt." Sarah's gasp was audible. Thomas started crying, and James joined him, both boys clinging to their mother. Grace began wailing, sensing the fear around her. "You're not taking my children." Lena's voice shook, but her stance was iron. "I'll die before I let you take them." "That can be arranged too, Mrs. Ward. Resisting a legal order, threatening an officer of the court, those are serious crimes." Ethan moved forward, but one of the hired men blocked him, hand on his gun. Everything was spiraling toward violence and disaster, and he couldn't see a way to stop it. Then hoofbeats sounded outside, multiple horses arriving fast. Through the door came Marshall Hewitt, followed by Horace Kimball, Frank Henderson in his Eastern lawyer suit, and a dozen townspeople, including Rachel Morrison and half the church congregation. Spence's confidence wavered. "What is this?" "This," Frank Henderson said, pulling papers from his satchel, "is a territorial injunction blocking Continental Mining from any collection activity against Mrs. Lena Ward pending a full hearing on the validity of your claim. You can't—" "I already did. Judge Carson signed it an hour ago." Henderson handed the papers to Hewitt. "Marshal, you're authorized to enforce this injunction and remove these men from Mr. Cole's property." Hewitt took the papers, scanned them, then looked at Spence with something like satisfaction. "You heard the man. You're trespassing. Get out." "This is outrageous. We have legal standing." "You have nothing until the hearing proves otherwise." Henderson stepped forward, and despite his youth, he carried authority that made Spence back up. "And at that hearing, I'll be presenting the Montana precedent that says debts from criminal activity don't transfer to uninvolved widows. I'll be presenting Marshal Hewitt's sworn testimony that Mrs. Ward had no knowledge of her husband's alleged crimes. And I'll be presenting character witnesses from this entire town attesting to her honesty and integrity." "You're representing her? On what retainer?" "On the retainer of $200 raised by the good people of Sweetwater, who are tired of mining companies exploiting vulnerable families." Henderson's voice hardened. "Continental might have deep pockets, but I have the law and the truth. We'll see which matters more to Judge Carson." Spence looked at the assembled crowd, at their hostile faces, at the marshal waiting to enforce the injunction. His hired men were already edging toward the door, unwilling to push this confrontation further. "This isn't over," Spence said, but the threat sounded hollow. "No, it's not. It's over when the judge rules, and I'm confident in how that ruling will go." Henderson gestured to the door. "Now get out before the marshal arrests you for trespassing and harassment." They left in a cluster of wounded pride and impotent anger. When the sound of their horses faded, Lena's legs gave out and she sat hard on the floor, still clutching Grace, while Sarah wrapped her arms around her mother and the boys pressed close. Ethan crossed to them and knelt, gathering them all into an embrace that included everyone. "You're safe. It's over." "How?" Lena looked at him with streaming eyes. "How did you—" "I didn't. They did." He gestured to the townspeople filling his cabin. "Sweetwater did." Rachel Morrison came forward, her smile warm despite tears on her own face. "Honey, did you think we'd just stand by and let Continental bully you? We've been organizing since the day after those lawyers searched your place. Frank here's been researching, Horace spread the word, and folks started donating. We had the money for his retainer in 3 days." "But why?" Lena's voice broke. "You don't even know me." "We know enough," Horace said gruffly. "Know you're a hard worker, good mother, honest woman who got dealt a bad hand. That's enough for us." "Besides," Rachel added, "Ethan vouched for you. And we trust Ethan. If he says you're worth fighting for, you're worth fighting for." Lena looked at Ethan, something shifting in her expression, gratitude and wonder, and something deeper that made his breath catch. Frank Henderson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ward, the hearing is in 2 weeks. We have a strong case, but I'll need your full cooperation. Testimony about your marriage, your knowledge of Daniel's activities, everything. Whatever you need." "Good. Then I'm confident we'll win this." He tipped his hat. "For now, rest easy. The injunction holds until the hearing, and Continental can't touch you or your children." The townspeople left in groups, each offering encouragement or small gifts, food, offers of childcare during the hearing, promises of testimony if needed. When the last of them had gone, Lena still sat on the floor, surrounded by her children, looking shell-shocked. "I can't believe they did that," she whispered. "Complete strangers raising money, fighting for me." "They're not strangers anymore," Ethan said. "They're neighbors, community, people who care what happens to you. I've never had that before. Never had people just help without expecting something back. Get used to it. That's how things work here." She stood slowly, settling Grace in the cradle before turning to him. "And you made this happen. Somehow, even locked in a jail cell, you arranged all this." "I told Horace about your situation. He did the rest. Because you asked. Because you cared enough to ask." She moved closer, close enough to touch. Why, Ethan? Why do you care so much about what happens to me? The children were watching, Sarah's eyes bright with curiosity, but Ethan didn't care. Some things needed saying regardless of audience. Because somewhere in the past 2 months, you stopped being someone I helped and became someone I can't imagine living without. You and your children, you've become my family, the family I thought I'd lost forever. He took her hands, feeling them tremble slightly in his grip. I love you, Lena. Not because you need help or because it's convenient, because you're strong and stubborn and you make me want to be better than I am. Because your laugh sounds like hope and your determination reminds me why life's worth fighting for. Lena's breath caught. Ethan, I'm not asking for anything, not expecting you to feel the same. Just needed you to know, before the hearing, before anything else happens, you matter to me. More than I thought anyone could matter again. She pulled her hands free, and for a moment he thought he'd ruined everything, pushed too far too fast. Then she reached up and pulled his face down to hers, kissing him with a fierceness that tasted like tears and relief and something that might have been love. When they broke apart, Thomas was giggling and Sarah was smiling and James was making exaggerated kissing noises until his sister swatted him. Does this mean Ethan's going to be our papa? Thomas asked. Lena looked at Ethan, question in her eyes, and he saw his answer in the hope on her face. If your mama will have me, then yes. I'd like that very much. Would you be a good papa? James asked seriously. Not like our old one? I'll try my best to be the kind of papa you deserve. The kind who stays, who keeps his promises, who loves you because you're you. Ethan looked at each child. If you'll give me the chance. Sarah came forward and hugged him hard, her thin arms surprisingly strong. You already are, she said. You already are. The 2 weeks before the hearing passed in a strange suspension between fear and hope. Frank Henderson visited twice more, preparing their testimony, building their case. Continental sent threatening letters that Henderson intercepted and added to his evidence of harassment. The town rallied with donations and support that left Lena tearful and humbled. And through it all, Ethan and Lena navigated their new relationship with the careful joy of people who'd learned not to take happiness for granted. They didn't rush toward marriage or permanence, just let themselves exist in the certainty that they wanted the same future. The night before the hearing, they sat outside watching stars while the children slept. What if we lose? Lena asked quietly. What if the judge rules against us? Then we appeal, fight it all the way to territorial Supreme Court if we have to. That could take years. Then it takes years. I'm not going anywhere. He took her hand. Win or lose tomorrow, we face it together. And we keep facing everything together until there's nothing left to face. She leaned against his shoulder, fitting there like she was made for that exact space. I never thought I'd get this. Second chance, real partnership, someone who chose me instead of someone I was stuck with. I'm the one who got lucky. You could have gone anywhere after the fire. Could have headed to California or back east or anywhere. But you stayed. Because this felt right. You felt right. She turned to look at him in the starlight. Even terrified and grieving and desperate, I knew somehow that you were safe, that here was where I was supposed to be. Here's where you belong, where you all belong. The hearing took place in Sweetwater's small courthouse, packed with townspeople who'd come to support Lena. Judge Carson presided with the same stern fairness he'd shown during Ethan's assault hearing, listening carefully as Frank Henderson laid out their case. He presented the Montana precedent clearly and thoroughly, called Marshall Hewitt to testify about finding no stolen property and Lena's obvious lack of knowledge, called Rachel Morrison and Horace Kimball to attest to Lena's character, called Ethan himself to describe the circumstances of finding Lena and her children, their situation since, his absolute conviction of her innocence. Spence fought hard, arguing legal technicalities and trying to paint Lena as complicit in her husband's crimes. But he had no evidence, only insinuation, and Judge Carson visibly tired of his tactics. After 3 hours of testimony and argument, the judge called recess to consider. They waited in tense silence until he returned and took his seat. I've reviewed the precedent Mr. Henderson cites, and I find it compelling and applicable. Mrs. Ward had no knowledge of her husband's alleged crimes. She received no benefit from any stolen property. She was barely surviving in the aftermath of losing everything. He looked directly at Spence. Pursuing a debt claim against this woman is legal harassment masquerading as justice, and I won't permit it. Relief flooded through the courtroom in audible gasps. I'm ruling that Continental Mining Company has no valid claim against Mrs. Lena Ward or her estate. The civil suit is dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. All collection activities must cease immediately. His gavel came down hard. This matter is closed. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Lena buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with tears of relief. Sarah hugged her mother fiercely while the boys danced around them. Ethan felt 3 years of grief and isolation crack open, letting in light and possibility and the simple joy of watching the woman he loved finally find freedom. Outside the courthouse, townspeople celebrated like it was a holiday. Rachel Morrison organized an impromptu gathering at the hotel, and suddenly there was food and music and a party that lasted until the stars came out. Through it all, Ethan stayed close to Lena, unwilling to let her out of his sight, still half afraid this was a dream that would dissolve. But she was solid and real, and laughing with a freedom he'd never seen from her before, and he knew this was the beginning of something permanent. As the party wound down, they gathered the children and headed home. The ride through darkness was peaceful, the children drowsing in the wagon bed while Ethan and Lena sat together on the bench. "So what now?" Lena asked. "We're free of Continental, free of the debt. What do we do with freedom?" "Live," Ethan said simply. "Build the life we want instead of the life we're forced into." "And what life do you want?" He was quiet, considering how to put it into words. "I want mornings with coffee and children fighting over who feeds the chickens. Want evenings reading while you sew and Grace fusses and the boys build cities in the dirt. Want to expand that garden until it feeds us year-round and maybe have enough to sell. Want to shore up the barn and add a room to the cabin and teach Thomas and James to ride properly. That's a lot of wanting. I've got 3 years of not wanting to make up for." He looked at her. "What do you want?" "The same. All of it. And—" She paused, then said firmly, "And I want to marry you. Not for protection or respectability, because I love you and want to build this life together as true partners." Ethan's heart felt too big for his chest. "That sounds perfect. When?" "Whenever you want. Tomorrow, next week, next year. I'm not going anywhere." "Next month," Lena decided. "Give us time to do it right. Have a real celebration instead of a rushed necessity." "Next month, then." They reached the cabin as midnight approached, and Ethan carried the sleeping children inside one by one while Lena tended Grace. When all 4 were settled, he and Lena stood in the cabin doorway, looking out at land that had stopped feeling like exile and started feeling like home. "Thank you," Lena said quietly, "for everything, for saving us, for fighting for us, for loving us enough to make this real. Thank you for letting me, for teaching me that living isn't the same as just surviving." He wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "For showing me that love doesn't make you weak, it makes you strong enough to face anything." She leaned into him, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the plains. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called and another answered, wild voices in the wilderness. But here, in the circle of lamplight spilling from the cabin, they'd built something tame and warm and worth protecting. The wedding took place on a clear October morning with the whole town in attendance. Lena wore a dress sewn from the blue cloth Ethan had bought months ago, and Sarah had woven prairie flowers into her mother's hair. The boys stood solemn in new shirts Rachel had donated, and Grace cooed contentedly in Horace's arms during the ceremony. Judge Carson officiated with surprising warmth, speaking about second chances and courage and the kind of love that grew from ashes. When Ethan kissed his bride, the cheers could probably be heard in the next county. The celebration lasted all day, food and music and dancing under the wide Wyoming sky. Ethan danced with Lena, then with Sarah, who stood on his feet giggling, then with Rachel Morrison, who told him he'd better treat his wife right or answer to every woman in Sweetwater. As the sun set and the party finally wound down, they loaded the children into the wagon for the ride home. Thomas and James fell asleep immediately, exhausted from running wild with other town children. Sarah stayed awake, watching the stars emerge, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been when Ethan first found them. Are you happy, Sarah? Lena asked her daughter quietly. Yes, Mama. Happier than I can remember being. Sarah looked at Ethan. Papa, can I call you Papa now? The word hit him with unexpected force, filling spaces in his heart he'd thought permanently empty. I'd be honored. Papa? She tried again, testing it. I'm glad you found us. Glad you didn't ride away like you could have. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. At the cabin, they settled the children into bed, Thomas and James sharing the loft with Sarah, Grace in her cradle near the bed that was now officially Ethan and Lena's. When the last child was asleep, they stepped outside into the cool night air. Strange how life works, Lena said, looking at the stars. 6 months ago, I was trapped in a marriage I hated, barely surviving, certain I'd die the same way I'd lived, struggling and alone. Now I'm standing here married to a good man, children safe and happy, with a future I actually want to see. 6 months ago, I was hiding from the world, convinced I was better off alone, that caring about anyone would just bring more pain. Ethan pulled her close. Took 4 starving children and their stubborn mother to teach me different. We were quite the pitiful sight when you found us. You were the most beautiful thing I'd seen in 3 years, not despite the desperation, because of it. Because you refused to give up even when giving up would have been easier. He kissed her temple. Still the most beautiful thing I see every day. They stood together watching the land spread out before them, the garden they'd built, the barn they'd repaired, the life they were creating from ashes and determination and love that had surprised them both. In the distance, thunder rumbled softly, not the violent storms of July, but the gentle rain that October sometimes brought, the kind that soaked into parched earth and promised growth. The first drops began to fall, cool and clean, and they turned to go inside. But Lena stopped at the threshold and looked back one more time at the horizon where lightning flickered silently. What are you thinking? Ethan asked. That I'm grateful for the fire that destroyed everything, strange as that sounds, because without it, I never would have found the courage to leave. Never would have ended up here, never would have found you. She smiled. Sometimes the worst things lead to the best things, if you're brave enough to keep walking through the ashes. And you're the bravest person I know. We're brave together, she corrected. That's what makes it work. Inside, the cabin was warm and filled with the soft breathing of sleeping children. Grace stirred in her cradle and Lena lifted her, settling into the rocking chair Ethan had built. He watched his wife nurse their daughter, not his by blood, but his by choice and love, and every way that mattered, and felt peace settle into bones that had been cold for 3 years. This was home. Not the cabin or the land, but these people. This family built from strangers who'd become everything. The children who called him Papa, with trust in their eyes. The woman who'd chosen him when she could have chosen easier paths. The life they were building together, day by day, choice by choice, love by love. Thunder rolled closer and rain began to fall in earnest, drumming on the roof he'd repaired with his own hands. But inside they were dry and warm and safe, sheltered against any storm that might come. Because they had already survived the worst fire could do, already walked through ashes and come out stronger on the other side. Whatever else the world threw at them, they'd face it the way they'd faced everything since that burning summer day. Together, stubborn, refusing to let go of the life they'd fought so hard to build. Lena looked up from Grace and met Ethan's eyes, and in that look was everything they'd survived, and everything they'd become, and everything they still hoped to be. No words needed, just understanding that ran deeper than language. Outside, the rain fell steady and sure, washing ashes into earth where new things would grow. And inside, a family slept safe beneath a roof made strong by shared work and stronger by shared love, while the land that had witnessed their struggle now held witness to their triumph. The fire had taken everything, but from those ashes had risen something no flame could ever destroy. A home built not of wood and stone, but of courage, partnership, and the fierce determination of 2 people who'd learned that the best second chances come from the hardest, first losses. And that was worth more than anything they'd left behind in the smoke.